and today what I'm gonna do is talk more about the law case. Is that even correct words? I mean, obviously those are words, but like, is that even like right? I don't know. Shit. Okay, I'm not a lawyer. We're gonna talk about the right. What the fuck am I saying? We're gonna be speaking about this goddamn court case. I don't know why, like, speaking has been extra difficult for me recently. Um, so we're going to be talking about Seven County Infrastructure Coalition versus Eagle County, Colorado. And so last live stream is when I had first found out like a whole nother court case is happening between Phil Anschutz and Neil Gorsuch. And my last live stream was really more about their connection, specifically as it relates to this next case that we're discussing today. So if you want to know more about the backstory between Phil Anschutz and Neil Gorsuch, I highly recommend not only checking out my whole playlist, which is linked in the description of this video on them, but also more specifically the video that I did last time. I don't think it was last night. I don't remember. It was like a few days ago, but I think, fuck, when the fuck did I do that? Anyway, like 2 days ago maybe? Shit, who knows? Okay, so time is weird right now. Alright, I've been doing a lot. But that video is linked in the description of this video, and it's about how Neil Gorsuch should have recused himself, something like that. Neil Gorsuch and recused are in the title. It's linked in the description of this video. So basically, what we're going to talk about today is the issue about whether the National Environmental Policy Act is going to be impacted by this court case or not, or like how that is going to come into play. And again, I don't know like the law. I'm not an attorney. I just like am fucking fascinated by studying it. But yeah, so fucking let's just get into this bitch because I talk a lot. Oh, but before we do, okay, so what we're gonna do first, fucking we're just gonna do a quick little overview of the connection between Phil and Neil. Is it Phil? Neil Gorsuch, Phil Anschutz, Phil and Neil? Huh. Shit. Phil and Neil? Alright, sorry. Phil and Neil. It kind of sounds weird, but and then we're gonna look at this dude named Leo and how he's connected to them. And then I want to watch this video on a press briefing from Accountable US, which wrote the letter calling Neil Gorsuch to recuse, but we'll see. He probably won't. And then we're gonna check out SCOTUSBlog overview of this, as well as what are the fucking court, like what's Justia and Oyez. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. What are like, what the fuck type of site is this? Like legal, what are legal websites saying about this? Basically, we're going to look at some of the documents related to all of this and the Supreme Court documents themselves. So yeah, fucking, alright, let's just do this bitch, my bad. I don't know why I'm so fucking like, it's because like my brain is fried, but I still want to do this, but I'm like, maybe I should wait till I'm in a better place because I'm dealing with a lot right now, but at the same time, that's why I want to do this right now, to take my mind off of that other shit, but because I've been dealing with so much other shit, my brain feels just broken right now. Sorry, I can't speak. Okay. Hi, my name is Lexi, aka Deaf Child. I'm born deaf, hard of hearing. Deafness runs in my family genetically. Speech is not fully accessible to me. My team was one of the top teams between 2020 and 2024 in New Orleans and Louisiana. I began doing business as Deaf Child in 2013, marketing 2011, and sales 2009. I've earned 50 plus certifications in marketing and sales, and I have my Bachelor of Science from Loyola University, New Orleans, with a music industry studies major and a business administration minor. Visit my site at noladeafchild.com. All right, so we covered this article last time, but I wanted to check it out again for the specific connection between Phil and Neil. So first of all, it's uh, Phil Anschutz is an oil giant, and so he's basically people are alleging that his connection to Neil Gorsuch, who is on the Supreme Court, um, is part of where they've been getting him to rule in favor for um, Phil Anschutz, and basically the Anschutz Exploration Corporation is could potentially be profiting off of these decisions and things like that. And so this is a very poor summary of that, like the TLDR. But yesterday's, not yet. What I keep saying yesterday, last live stream that I did on this went way more into that. It's linked in the description of this video if you want to go check that out. Um, and so yeah, but so from this article though, there's this dude named Leo, and Leo is involved with the Charles and David Koch or whatever the fuck their name are, and they're also all connected to Philip Anschutz, and I think I covered his connection, the Koch brothers' connection to Anschutz in either the second or third video I did on all of this. I will link that video in the description of this video whenever I go find it. But I did previously cover their connection. I just can't remember which video I did that in. But yeah, fucking basically, so Leo, so there's this like historic billion dark money transfer. So I thought that this transfer was originally from Phil Anschutz, is what I had originally assumed. But here I'm seeing it's from Leonard Leo, or maybe there's both, because I know Phil Anschutz definitely did donate, so maybe it could be both. But that's like what I was thinking first. But basically, this dude basically Leonard Leo funded a dark money group ran by Trump's judicial wait a minute, I can't speak. Bar Seed, who's an industrialist, Bar Seed funded a new dark money group ran by Trump judicial advisor Leonard Leo, who helped eliminate federal abortion rights. And so he's also involved because the think tank from the Property and Environmental Research Center that advocates for privatizing federal lands and rolling back endangered species protection under the guise of free market environmentalism. And this is part of the dude that helped orchestrate the Supreme Court's current far-right majority. Okay, you see how that's all connected there. Now, is Anschutz in here? Nope. Okay, let's leave it at that. Let's leave it at that and move on, because we covered this already. I'm curious as to where my Phil Anschutz thing video is from, but you know what? That's a different story. So, fucking, the Accountable US, he's basically, there were the people that behind calling out and writing the letter to ask Neil Gorsuch to recuse himself. Fucking, they published a webinar on this shit. So I figured we could watch this. I'm gonna play it at like 1.75 speed, see if that's good. We're just gonna check this out, maybe do some commentary on it. Maybe I'll get bored and we'll skip around, but I just want to see what the fuck these bitches have to say about it. So yeah, let's check this shit out, and then we're going to dive into the case officially even more after this.
Thanks everybody for joining today. My name is Caroline Saccone. I'm the president of Accountable.us. We work every day to shine a spotlight on the far right and special interests who have too much influence in Washington. We spend a lot of time.
1.75 is a little too fast for me. She's a fast speaker like me probably. So I'm gonna try 1.5.
In the past couple of years, focused on the broken and corrupt MAGA captured Supreme Court. It's with great sadness that we have to do this call today. We have so much at stake, so many policies that are so critical to people's lives, and yet on the eve of this new Supreme Court term, this is a court that is still shrouded in ethical issues and scandal, and does not seem motivated to end those practices. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. We are so thrilled to have Representative Hank Johnson joining us today. We'll hear a little bit more about his leadership and thoughts on this issue. He's the ranking member of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Courts, chair of the Court Reform Now Task Force, and a steadfast partner and longtime champion making the courts more ethical and accountable. We're so grateful for you being here today. So please, everyone, welcome Representative Johnson of Georgia.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Accountable US, for bringing us together today. And it is sad that we are called upon at this moment to deal with a unaccountable, arrogant, reckless, and out of control United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. A court, I just had my 70th birthday yesterday, so I was born in 1954. And having been born and raised in Washington, D.C. by a school teacher, a second grade school teacher who wanted to make sure that my reading and comprehension were up to par. She used to have me sit down reading the Washington Post, the A section, to her while she washed dishes after dinner. And so that's how I got to understand events happening in Washington, D.C., not just legislative, but also in the judicial branch, because when I was 4, I had decided that I wanted to be a lawyer, just like my dear cousin, who was about 20 years ahead of me. And when he became a lawyer when I was 4 years old, I decided I want to be a lawyer too. And so wanting to be a lawyer and then reading about all of the things that the United States Supreme Court was doing during the Warren era and how it impacted the lives of Black people in this country, that's how I grew up. That's what I grew up with, a United States Supreme Court that was serving the people and applying the law so that it fit everyone. And so I have high esteem for the United States Supreme Court. But today, Caroline, it's sad that we have reached this point where we have a United States Supreme Court that is thoroughly corrupt by money, by lobbyist money. What lobbyists do is, once they were prevented from from unbridled contact with the legislative and executive branches due to the things like the Abramoff scandal back in the early 2000s, where lobbyists could wine and dine members of Congress, did not have to report their spending, did not have to even register as lobbyists. All of that led to a culture of corruption in the legislative branch, and it was remedied by legislation. And today we have the same situation occurring. The lobbyists have moved away from the legislative branch to the judicial branch, and they are accomplishing through the judiciary what they can't accomplish legislatively. And so these lobbyists, what they do is have luxury locations that they invite Supreme Court justices to deliver remarks to a certain group of people, unknown to the American people, because it's all secret. We don't even know when these things are held. We don't know who's participating in them, but we do have some idea as to who is behind them. And oftentimes it is the very interests that are presenting cases to the United States Supreme Court. These interests are wining and dining our Supreme Court justices, who have grown up now in a culture of entitlement. They make $240,000+ a year, but it's not enough for them to lead a life of an ultra luxury patron like those who patronize our justices. And so they wine and dine them, send them on vacations and to opulent locations and listen to them speak, but at the same time,
I feel almost rude interrupting him, but I just want, I'm realizing this is what I was reading in my last live stream. So this is where those quotes are coming from. But it's honestly, I think, definitely worth it watching it from them saying it, because it's totally different for me to read these words and then be processing them while I read it versus have someone tell me their story in their own words, and it's their story, their thoughts. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. That's just me.
These lobbyists have messages that they want the Supreme Court justices to understand, and the Supreme Court justices go back and take up cases that these interests are interested in, and they rule in the favor of the special interests who have wined and dined them. And that is what we have coming up with this 7-county infrastructure coalition versus Eagle County, Colorado case, where the United States Supreme Court will rule on whether environmental reviews of public lands projects must consider and disclose indirect and cumulative environmental effects, such as climate change, and things like potential oil spills, what impact those could have on a particular project. And of course, 7-county infrastructure coalition versus Eagle County, 7-county wants to not be bound by strict environmental regulations. And so they're trying to get the review of these projects watered down. And one of the people who are behind that case is someone who has an interest that was represented by Justice Neil Gorsuch. And Justice Gorsuch, as a 10th Circuit judge, recused himself on numerous cases involving that same interest because he had represented that interest before. But now comes this case, 7-county infrastructure coalition versus Eagle County, where this interest has filed a friend of court brief and has made it known what his particular outcome, his favorite outcome would be. And the problem is that Justice Gorsuch is refusing to recuse himself from this case. And this is why we are so sad today, as we've gotten to this point of having to expose this kind of corruption that is taking place on the United States Supreme Court. Has to be dealt with legislation, and I'm proud to be carrying forward in the House the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act, which would apply a set of guidelines and enforcement mechanisms so that we can start rooting out this kind of corruption on the United States Supreme Court. And with that, I think I have probably come close to or even exceeded my time. And so I will now yield it back to our host, and we'll stick around for any questions that I can answer. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Representative Johnson, and happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
And looking forward to the question portion at the end. There's so many common sense reforms that you're advocating for that we really are long past due. So thank you for your leadership. I am going to just run through a little bit more on the particulars of the conflict that the accountable analysis revealed. And then we are going to hear from our close partner at LCV, Doug Linder. Let me just set the table a little bit. We heard about what is at stake with the 7-county case. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the nature of the conflict. I think this is what's really, this is very interesting, and yet also it was hiding in plain sight. It's a pretty obvious conflict, and there really should not be a question here. Justice Gorsuch should recuse. This kind of conflict wouldn't exist anywhere else in American life, not between a reporter and a source, a judge and a criminal suspect, or in a private business. There's no doubt that there should be some separation here. But unfortunately, as we've seen in the past few years, the Supreme Court has proven that they are unwilling to follow those sets of rules that everyone else lives by, and they are flouting basic ethical standards that we have throughout many different, kinds of employment, particularly, what should be in the highest court of the land. What's at issue here is really a lack of public trust in our checks and balances in democracy. And if Justice Gorsuch hears this case, there's really, it really puts the entire system into question. A few of the data points that we have revealed. As Representative Johnson laid out, in the early 2000s, Justice Gorsuch was outside legal counsel for billionaire Phil Anschutz and his companies. Long after Anschutz recommended.
So my thinking too is, if Neil Gorsuch can admit that he needs to recuse himself from a bunch of shit because of his ties to Phil Anschutz, then why won't he do it now? Because he's already admitted publicly several times he should recuse himself. So it's even he knows he should, in my opinion, but isn't,
Recommended Gorsuch to George W. Bush, to that administration, for him to become a judge on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, which we know he was nominated in weeks. So by Justice Gorsuch's own analysis, he recognizes the conflict. When he sat on the 10th Circuit, he recused himself from dozens of cases involving Anschutz and his companies. If you would like a list of those cases, we are happy to provide them. But his ties continued to deepen. He became a semi-regular speaker at the annual dove hunting retreat at Anschutz's ranch, the sprawling Eagles Nest Ranch in eastern Colorado. Gorsuch also purchased a property north of Denver, along with the director of Anschutz Exploration and another Anschutz associate. And the three of them owned this property jointly for several years. So I think the conflict is pretty clear cut. We'll hear more from Doug on, what's at stake here, but this is a really, really important case, as we know. The proposed rail line that would run through Uintah Basin, it it would drive down freighting costs for oil producers in the region, including for Phil Anschutz, whose oil and gas company, Anschutz Exploration Corporation, currently operates dozens of wells there. It is very clear on the Utah map that they that the government has maintains the ownership of these wells. And so instead of complying with the lower court's ruling, these developers and their special interest allies are trying to roll back NEPA, which would have consequences, obviously, for this case and throughout many, many other cases. In early September, Anschutz Exploration filed an amicus brief encouraging the Supreme Court to greenlight the railway's development by limiting the scope of its mandatory environmental review. Anschutz said the Anschutz Exploration, the company, said in their amicus brief, quote, "Far more is at stake in this case than the 88-mile rail line in rural Utah." So take their word for it. That is why this case should be handled with the utmost care. Americans should have full confidence in the impartiality of the justices who are hearing this case. And we cannot have that confidence when Justice Gorsuch has not recused himself. And we really do deserve better from our Supreme Court. And we are hoping that Justice Gorsuch, looks at the facts and decides to recuse himself and restore some sense of integrity into the court. With that, I would now like to hand the call over to.
Okay, I do think that Gorsuch should recuse himself, but no, I don't think that is what would restore integrity into the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court as a whole has no integrity. Like, what the fuck?
To Legal Conservation Voters Senior Director of the Judiciary and Democracy, Doug Leonard. Over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for breaking this news and bringing us together today. Happy birthday, and thank you to Congressman Johnson for your tireless foundational leadership in the fight for fair courts. And thank you to all of you for being here. As Caroline said, I am Doug Lindner, and I am Senior Director of Judiciary and Democracy at the League of Conservation Voters. We at LCV know that our climate, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and our fundamental freedoms need ethical, impartial judges who will protect them. But we also know the 6 MAGA justices on the Supreme Court have repeatedly twisted the law to undermine critical climate, clean air, and clean water safeguards. And now, thanks to the work of our partners at accountable.us, we know that yet another MAGA justice has yet another financial conflict of interest related to big polluters. Honestly, this all feels like deja vu to me. 2 years ago, this MAGA supermajority severely curtailed EPA authority to fight climate change under the Clean Air Act. Last year, they imperiled clean drinking water across the country by dramatically narrowing the scope of the Clean Water Act. In a single week this summer, they not only froze a critical clean air standard, but also decided a trio of cases that upended decades of precedent and massively shifted power from public interest agencies like the EPA, as well as elected officials and voters, to the Supreme Court itself. Power across every area of public policy. Power the MAGA justices can use to serve the political and financial interests of big polluters, big business, and far-right politicians. So they can reward the billionaires and extremists who helped them capture this court and whose money showers on the justices themselves. Justice Sotomayor called these cases a power grab. Justice Jackson said the majority has invited a tsunami of lawsuits threatening longstanding public protections, including for our rights to clean air, clean water, health, and safety. Justice Kagan has said the court is appointing itself the national decision maker on environmental policy. Meanwhile, at least 3 of the 6 MAGA justices have corrupt ties to the big polluters. Clarence Thomas speaks at political fundraisers for oil billionaire Charles Koch and vacations with Charles Koch. Thomas does not recuse from environmental cases, even when front groups backed by Charles Koch.
Oh, so it is Coke. Okay, so dude, I've been saying cock. I've been saying cock, Koch, Coke, I don't know, man. I've been saying all sorts of shit, man. Fucking. So, like, should I be respectful and say Coke now? Or can I just say cock because they're fucking dicks? Like, I'm just saying.
Create those cases for the purpose of rolling back environmental protections. Samuel Alito's wife is best known for her insurrection flags and her hot mic comments, but she also owns land in Oklahoma that she leases to an oil and gas company for oil and gas extraction, and yes, of course, she gets a cut of the proceeds. Yet not only does Samuel Alito refuse to recuse from relevant cases, he actually wrote the majority opinion in last year's awful Clean Water Act case. So now we have yet another case, backed by yet another fossil fuel billionaire, to undermine yet another core protection for our environment, our health, and our safety. And yet another MAGA justice with financial ties to big oil. This is Seton County Infrastructure Coalition v. Eagle County. And like the public agency cases the court decided a few months ago, this case threatens not just core environmental protections, but also the people's right to have a say in major decisions about their communities. NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, is a pillar of Americans' freedom to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and protect themselves from exploitation by big polluters. NEPA is one of the only forms of meaningful public engagement available to communities to hold the federal government and industries accountable for potential environmental and health impacts of proposed projects. This is how communities weigh in on the permitting process. This is how the people's voices are heard. Limiting the scope of NEPA reviews is hugely undemocratic. It silences community voices, allows industries like big oil to bury the true costs of their projects on public health, and creates sacrifice zones where heavy industry concentrates their pollution, predominantly in low income.
I wonder if part of overturning NEPA also is to work around violating indigenous treaties by not having to honor indigenous tribal sovereignty via the Ute. Is it Ute or Ute? I am so sorry. I don't know how to say this. Ute. If I'm saying this wrong, I'm probably saying this wrong. I apologize. I don't know how to say your tribal name correctly. I don't think Google would help me, or I would try it. Because, and the reason I say that though is because if I Google shit from my own family, shit, they say a lot wrong. There is some accurate shit out there though. So it depends. It depends. Okay, my bad. Let's keep going.
Income communities and communities of color. If the scope of NEPA review is scaled back, it won't just mean more pollution and less ability for the people to have a say. It will also mean communities whose health, safety, air, water, and land are impacted won't even know about those dangers in advance because the government won't even consider them, let alone give anyone a chance to weigh in before they happen. And that's exactly what big oil wants. They want to be able to pollute without consequence, silence the voices of the people, and corrupt our institutions to make it all easier and more profitable. Justice Neil Gorsuch has voted with the anti-environment majority in every case I've mentioned today, but to his credit, he has a history of recusing from cases involving the oil billionaire backing the 7-county case. It is not too late for him to do the right thing on this one. If Gorsuch wants to show that his anti-environment record is about more than his ties to the industry, he needs to do the right thing and recuse from this case too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but he didn't recuse from that other case. I do want to fucking Google how to say it. Fucking, oh.
The scientists and engineers that support the next mission to Mars could be in this class.
There, it is
district to Navajo, Ute, Ute Mountain Ute, Hopi, Zuni.
Okay, I think they're saying Ute. So I'm gonna blame this video if I'm wrong. I apologize. Okay.
Much, Doug. I'm Angela Canterbury. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs at Accountable.us. And I would like to invite Caroline and Representative Johnson to come back on and have a short discussion. We received a few questions from the audience. Please do drop questions, comments you may have into the Q&A. First of all, we've got a question about whether or not we've received any response from Justice Gorsuch. And Caroline, I'm going to hand that over to you, and I'm going to ask if we have and what our plans are going forward.
Sure. So thus far, we have not heard anything from the court or from Justice Gorsuch in terms of recusal. So, it's not too late for him to do the right thing, but we have no evidence to suggest that he is planning to recuse.
He didn't recuse on the last one, so I feel like it's good for them to try and still keep putting pressure on them. I'm not saying this is bad for them to be doing, but some of them wording, I'm like, I wonder if they're just trying to also suck his dick metaphorically. You know what I'm saying? It'd be real cool if you weren't such a piece of shit. That I don't know, but.
Recuse. There and more on that. We will be accountable. Will be and some other folks will be taking some additional steps to keep continuing the call to the justice to do the right things.
Thanks so much, Doug. Can you tell us a little bit more about these environmental cases that have already been decided and how some of the polluters have been backing them?
Absolutely. So I talked a little bit earlier about some of these cases, including West Virginia v. EPA, the 2022 case that rolled back Climate Authority under the Clean Air Act, Sackett v. EPA, the 2023 case that rolled back the scope of the Clean Water Act, and a few public agencies cases this year, most notably Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo. I could go on about this, but I want to talk briefly about that West Virginia case, the climate case from 2022, because I think this is so emblematic of the way this court majority approaches environmental cases. This is a case in 2022 about the legality of the Obama-era Clean Power Plan, a regulation that was put on hold by the Supreme Court back in 2016 that never went into effect because they put that on hold, that was then repealed by the Trump administration, that they tried to replace it. By the time the Supreme Court agreed to hear this case, there was no regulation on the books, and certainly not that Obama regulation. The Biden administration said they would not bring back the Obama-era regulation. And so, as a constitutional matter, there was no case or controversy for the court to rule on. It was unconstitutional for them to hear that case at all. But they were looking for an opportunity to curtail the executive branch's most important authority to fight climate change, because they don't work for the American people, they work for the fossil fuel industry. And there are so many more examples like this, and so many more details to that story, but for the sake of time, I will leave it there for the moment unless folks have follow-ups.
Thanks so much, Doug. Congressman, we've got a question for you from Courthouse News. And on the legislative side of things, any developments on the SCIRT Act, which you mentioned, or the other court reforms that you're advancing, what are the prospects for reform there? And have there been any discussions with party leadership about whether or not this legislation could move forward, potentially under a Democratic Congress post-election?
Well, thank you for that question. And yes, I have been in discussion with House leadership on the Democratic side about making the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act, also the Term Act, which would limit Supreme Court justices to 18-year term limits, and which would go into effect as soon as the legislation was passed, which would result then in the removal immediately of the longest serving justice at this point, who is Clarence Thomas with 32 years of service, I believe. And then 2 years thereafter, the next longest serving justice would come off, who is now Chief Justice Roberts, who I believe has 20 years of service in now. And then after he, 2 years later, according to the Term Act, Justice Alito would rotate off the bench. He will have accrued in excess of 18 years. And thereafter, every 2 years, a justice would rotate off of the United States Supreme Court and assume senior status as a justice on the Supreme Court. And in this way, we could break the fever of the current climate of corruption that has infested and infected this current court. So term limits is so important. It has become an issue that even President Biden has mentioned being interested in. And so I think that those two legislative pieces are in line to become priorities. I hope I'm going to be working hard to make sure that those are House Democratic priorities as we move forward, assuming that Democrats can.
I feel stupid as shit because I really should have paid attention to the judiciary, executive, and legislative branches and the checks and balances and all of that. Look, I feel like I remember some shit, but I don't study this shit enough to like really tell you about that shit, right? But here's what I don't get. Like, would the Supreme Court, well, rather, yeah, my question is, would the Supreme Court be able to put a stop to that though? Like, because what if they aren't, like, I know there's theoretically this system of checks and balances is supposed to stop the Supreme Court from having unlimited power, theoretically, right? But hear me out, wouldn't they do everything they could to make that not happen? Like, say someone's like, I'm coming for your job. I'm gonna be like, all right, bet. Let's see what I can do to keep it. You know what I mean? I don't know, but, but, yeah.
Can regain control of the House of Representatives. And then, of course, the third piece of legislation, which would result in an expansion of the court, the Judiciary Act of 2023 is what its name is, and it would add 4 seats to the court. That is the most popular piece of Supreme Court legislation, but it is one that is less favored by institutionalists who reign in the executive and legislative branches of government. But it's also got great potential, in my humble opinion, because the public wants to see it happen. So I think that with the president having acknowledged that there is a need for reform on our Supreme Court, I think that it gives it the kind of impetus as we elect a new president who I expect will carry forward that particular proposal or that particular insight from President Joe Biden. I believe that things are looking good for Supreme Court reform, which is really something that needs to take place, because when the public loses confidence in the ability of our justices to be fair and impartial, it affects the rule of law upon which we live, and it is the rule of law upon which our democracy is based. If we have no respect for the rule of law, then we have no democracy. And so that's why it's so important that we commit to doing court reform.
Absolutely. We could not agree more. And thank you for all that you're doing on that front. I have 2 questions related to Chief Justice Roberts' code of conduct. One of our attendees asks whether or not this is a clear violation of that code of conduct. Another says this isn't really a violation, is it, since it explicitly states that filing an amicus brief does not require a justice's disqualification. I wonder if you could speak to that code of conduct, Congressman, and then I'll invite Doug and Caroline also to weigh in if they wish.
Yeah, the United States Supreme Court has adopted a code of conduct for itself, but the problem is that it leaves enforcement of the code, interpretation and enforcement, up to the.
So the amicus curiae thing that they are, I said amicus, AMICUS. And I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I think I'm saying curiae, CURIEA or E or something like that, CURIEAE. Fuck, I don't know how to spell that. All right, my bad. I said I don't know how to spell it. Yeah, there it goes. Okay, fucking. But that was filed by Phil Anschutz, who owns the Anschutz Corporation and AEG Group, who is the financial beneficiary from the cheaper oil transportation as a result of this case, and also who Neil Gorsuch benefited financially from and to get onto the Supreme Court. And so it's that, you know what I'm saying? Like, there it is. And so they're saying, you know, like, shouldn't the dude who helped pay for a Supreme Court justice get on the bench filing a document in a court case be enough to get a recusal? You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's what's kind of being discussed here.
Justice, the individual justices themselves. So it's a one-man judge and jury. One person should not be able to be the judge and jury over their own case. So the Supreme Court is violating that fundamental precept by adopting a code of conduct without any enforcement mechanism. The Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal and Transparency Act would correct that deficiency by putting in place a mechanism, a body that would put in place a body that would rule on these kinds of disputes. It would set up a procedure where independent parties could actually file a complaint or file a motion to recuse, and it would be heard by a panel of Chief Circuit Court judges. And they would then make the recommendation as to what should happen. But as it stands now, it's up to the justice, him or herself, whether or not to recuse, and that's untenable at this time.
Any other thoughts about that?
You know, we have all gotten quite an education in the last couple of years about how shockingly, comically, tragically low the ethical standards on the highest court in the land are. And so whether any particular act of any particular justice violates the absolutely bare bottom, ridiculously low standards for ethics the court has, I think is not the main thing here. Judges, or at least judges not in the Supreme Court, because nothing applies to, or very little binds on them in an enforceable way, but all other judges are required to follow a code of conduct. And one of the things that binds on them is they're supposed to avoid not just impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety. And we know there are some judges on this court who act in open defiance of the idea that anyone else's opinion of their conduct means anything. And that is just so damaging to the institutions. And, you know, Congressman Johnson was talking about the Judiciary Act to expand and rebalance the court in addition to ethics reforms, which we at LCB strongly support. And we think the institutionalist position here is to make our institutions work better for the people. And that is what we need here. So regardless of whether or not existing law is sufficient to cover this particular scenario, of which I have no particular legal opinion at the moment, the issue here is it looks really unethical. In an era of so many things that look so incredibly unethical from this court, it is just untenable. And this is yet another opportunity for one of these MAGA justices to show us either that they care about looking corrupt or that they don't.
And I just want to add and agree with all these excellent points we've just heard. I want to get really specific, and then I want to get very big picture. Specifically on this case, there are multiple data points that show the conflict between Justice Gorsuch and Anschutz. The history of Justice Gorsuch with Anschutz and his corporations is long and detailed. Also at stake in this case, it's not just the amicus brief, it's that the Anschutz Corporation has to stand to financially benefit from this specific decision with this specific railway. They do control some of the assets in a portion of the assets in this basin. So this is a colorful and there are multiple data points. I think pulling back to echo what Representative Johnson and Doug said, at what point, it's the fool me once old adage. At what point do they think that we're not, they've pulled one over on us? It's gotten out of control. And I think that we know, clearly Chief Justice Roberts felt some pressure based on the record low approval ratings of the court and did something last year because he wanted to release some steam. It was a PR stunt and we know that because it's not binding. It is a gentleman's handshake, basically. And we still see all of these, we are still seeing conflicts. And I think this case is a great example of that, which if it's really as effective as he wants it to be, as he says it is, well, shouldn't it be mitigating these sorts of conflicts from being able to go forth? And I think that is, until these conflicts go away and the justices stop, trying to sneak through with these sorts of conflicts, it's clearly not enough. I mean, how many more times can Justice Thomas, amend his various documents, or is there another trip that's revealed? I mean, the volume is just very high, and it shows that it's not enough. And so, again, it's more than just one particular case. It's more than just, it's a pattern. And I think that, to me, the takeaway is there's a long history for, 30 years, the far right ran a very, very aggressive program to try to have influence in the courts, get, through donor influence, and now they want to return on their investment. And cases like this, that's the ROI they're looking for. That's why they did this. And we will have a dirtier planet as a result.
Sad but true. We have one last question, and I understand we're over time. Thank you all for sticking with us, especially our panelists. One last question, then if each of our speakers would like to say just a word or two to close. So we have a question about whether or not Gorsuch has recused himself from any other cases connected to Anschutz. Caroline, you want to take that one?
Is that even a question though? Because I said in the webinar that we just watched several times that he had recused previously from a bunch of cases. So for me, I'm like, was that person asking the question just not paying attention, or did they go into the webinar late? But because they said that several times, or am I hallucinating? Fucking also, like, I was thinking, like how objectively, you know, people in the legal industry are able to communicate about shit. I really just suck at doing that, like, because I just get too fucking emotional. I'm just like, nah, man, you fucking suck. Fuck you, bitch. You know what I mean? Like, I'm really not good at sticking to the data points. I'm over here like, yeah, fuck you. But that's just me. Like, that, I'm so proud of them. Good job, guys.
On the 10th Circuit, he did many times. But to our knowledge, there haven't been any cases involving Anschutz since his time on the Supreme Court, to our knowledge. Right. I think those are the correct details.
Yeah, and although his oil company certainly stood to benefit from cases, including the overturning of Chevron, so there was that, and I think there were calls for Gorsuch to recuse in that case as well, but obviously the conflict here is much more specific and damning.
Yeah, he didn't recuse himself in that case either. I wonder if the reason the conflict here is more specific and damaging is the specific connection to the railroad as well. Because before, his company would overall benefit, obviously, but not just his company specifically, like all people in the industry. But in this case, all people in the industry could, but also his company specifically. You know what I mean? So because of what the case itself is about versus what could happen with the case with the NEPA overturning, that might impact everybody, but the specific case itself does apply to business dealings of Anschutz. You know what I mean? So I could see that argument there.
So with that, I would like to thank our panelists for joining us, especially Congressman Johnson. We would like to wish you a happy birthday again. And thanks for taking the time, everyone who joined this call. If we didn't get to your question, please be in touch with me, and I would be happy to make sure those questions get answered.
All right, looks like that's it. So this is linked in the description of the video if you want to watch it normal speed or without my commentary. Maybe I should have already said that. Fuck it, whatever. If you are here now, you probably just watched the damn thing. Yeah, whoops. Anyway, fucking, so, you know what? I think I should do a little ad spot. This is a little ad for Monkey Monkey. So, fucking, SCOTUSBlog published what has been occurring so far with 7-County Infrastructure Coalition versus Eagle County, Colorado. So here they outline the issue right here. It's whether the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA, requires an agency to study environmental impacts beyond the proximate effects of the action over which the agency has regulatory authority. So they're saying if the agency can't do anything about having authority over regulating an environmental issue, should the agency still be able to study the impact of an environmental issue? Is fucking right. Like, this is just like the ADA thing all over again, where they were trying to say people with disabilities shouldn't be able to test for accommodations if they don't necessarily plan on going at that point. But how can we plan on going if we don't know if you accommodate us, bitch? So fucking, but I'm gonna have to link that playlist, the Aixon versus Laufer, Laufer. I'll link that playlist if I can remember to in the description of this video. Anyway, fucking, so it originally started in March, or whatever, when was when the first case filings has happened, and it's last been updated around October. You know, we've had briefs and things happen, and to be honest, I don't know shit about the law, so I really can't do a good job of summarizing. You know what? I did not link. This is a different one. Yeah, I did not even link this one. I'm gonna link this. So this one is not linked in the description of this video. I'm gonna have to do that after. Alright, my bad. Fucking. So I'm really interested in what the Ute Indian Tribe of the Uintah and Ouray Reservation has been filing. So I'm gonna read their filings because I just want to hear from the indigenous perspectives on that, from their law team, from their legal team. And we're just gonna ignore the rest, and then we're also gonna look at I had pulled up from Justia, I believe, with the briefs and filings. I think I got the main document for the Writ of Certiorari or whatever. So we're gonna look at oh wait, so we got the briefs from the shit, sorry, I don't know shit about the law. So okay, so we're going to look at the original petition. We're going to look at two briefs filed by the shit, I'm so sorry, guys, from the Ute Indian Tribe. Ute. Why the fuck can I say? I'm so sorry, guys. This is indigenous erasure. Anyway, so a lot has been filed. Basically, we're waiting for the argument to happen. The argument is set for December 10th, 2024. So let's mark our calendars, guys, because that's when shit's gonna roll. And so I will be covering all of this again then. So I might do a deeper read on some of these documents before then. But today we're just going to finish checking out some of the overall filings regarding all of this. So SCOTUSBlog has good documentation, so does Justia. It's linked in the description of this video. And so we need to mark our calendars for December 10th. If I don't think that they do any form of live streaming on this court case, but if that did happen or does happen, then I will see about live streaming the court case live or something. But yeah, fucking Oyez, I don't know how to say this right, but is it Oyez or Oyez? Oyez? Sorry guys. They have also their documentation on 7-County Infrastructure Coalition versus Eagle County, Colorado, and they also have I like their summary here. So we're just gonna read this real quick, give us a little actual understanding of the case, because again, I don't know shit about the law. So the petitioner is 7-County Infrastructure Coalition. The respondent is Eagle County, Colorado. The case is still pending. It looks like it is set for December 10th. So yeah, and it was granted in June of this year. So facts of the case. The Surface Transportation Board, STB, granted a petition from the 7-County Infrastructure Coalition to construct and operate an 80-mile railway in Utah's Uintah Basin. The railway's primary purpose would be to transport waxy crude oil from the basin to the National Rail Network. The STB conducted an environmental review process, including the preparation of an environmental impact statement as required by the National Environmental Policy Act. The board issued a final decision in December 2021, authorizing the construction and operation of the railway subject to environmental mitigation conditions. In its environmental analysis, the STB considered various impacts of the railway's construction and operation within the project area, including effects on water resources, air quality, special status species, land use, and local economies. However, the board declined to analyze certain downline impacts, effects from increased train traffic on existing rail lines beyond the new railway. The STB also omitted analysis of other potential environmental effects, such as increased crude oil refining impacts on Gulf Coast communities, upline impacts of increased drilling in the Uinta Basin, and downline effects of potential oil spills along the Colorado River. Finally, the board did not disclose the potential effects of the project on historic sites or structures along the Union Pacific Line in Eagle County. The board justified these omissions by arguing that minimal increases in train traffic on existing lines were unlikely to cause significant impacts, and that some effects were beyond the scope of its regulatory authority. Eagle County asked the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit to review the board's orders, and granted the petitions in part, denied them in part, and vacated the underlying order. So the question, does the National Environmental Policy Act require an agency to study environmental impacts beyond the proximate effects of the action over which the agency has regulatory authority? Now, obviously, I think this shit should be fucking monitored, but I don't know shit about the law, so let's see what fuck happens, regardless of what the fuck I think should happen. But, yeah. So, basically, it looks like the 7-county infrastructure coalition is trying to construct their fucking railway, and the Eagle County is just trying to be like, yeah, this doesn't look environmentally sustainable, maybe we shouldn't do that, and they're trying to fucking do it anyway. I don't know. The range of actions covered by NEPA is broad and includes adopting federal land management actions. I don't know. I feel like NEPA is covered in this, but that's just me. I will try to remember to link this in the description of the video. This is from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and it's talking about what is the scope of the National Environmental Policy Act. I feel that this is within the scope, but that's just me. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just, I'll link this information though. So yeah, fucking moving on. We have a couple of documents to check out here. So first, we've got the original petition in the court from 7-County Infrastructure Coalition and the Uintah Railway versus the Eagle County, Colorado, and Center for Biological Diversity and others. And so this is where they were trying to, say. So what I'm going to do is check out the question presented. Then we're going to go into the table of contents. We're going to look at the statement of the case from the legal, and I might read the legal background, might skim and scan that. We'll probably read that. We'll read the legal background, the factual background, and we'll look at the administrative and judicial proceedings. And then we're going to read the conclusion. for now. And they're debating, it looks like for the reasons for granting the petition, they are debating semantics over what words mean in the law. I guess that's a pretty good way to sum up any fucking court case, huh? But, I mean, that is what's happening. Fucking, alright. So, let's check out let's zoom in a little here. Question presented. In Department of Transportation versus Public Citizen, 541 U.S. I'm not saying all that, sorry. This court held that when an agency cannot prevent an environmental effect due to its limited statutory authority over the relevant actions, the National Environmental Policy Act does not require it to study that effect. This holding has divided the Court of Appeals. 5 circuits read public citizen to mean that an agency's environmental review can stop where its regulatory authority stops. 2 circuits disagree and require a review of any impact that can be recalled reasonably foreseeable. Here, the Surface Transportation Board relied on public citizen to cabin its environmental review of a new rail line in Utah. But the D.C. Circuit rejected that approach, ruling that the board cannot avoid environmental review on the ground that it lacks authority to prevent, control, or mitigate distant environmental effects. That's not what the United States Environmental Protection Agency says, but that's just me. Anyway. As a result, it ordered the board to study the local effects of oil wells and refineries that lie outside the board's regulatory authority. The question presented is whether the National Environmental Policy Act requires an agency to study environmental impacts beyond the proximate effects of the action over which the agency has regulatory authority. Okie dokie. And now we're going to move on down to the statement of the case. We're going to go to page 7 here. Well, that didn't work out for me. That was the wrong page 7. Okay. Statement of the case. The National Environmental Policy Act makes a broad national commitment to protecting and promoting environmental quality. To fulfill that commitment, NEPA requires agencies to prepare a report that takes a hard look at the environmental consequences of their actions. But NEPA itself does not mandate particular results, only the necessary process for considering the environmental effects of agency action. Because this environmental review process can become an end in itself, the court from time to time has had to step in to draw common sense boundaries. This case should be another one of those times. A. Legal background. Public Citizen illustrates how this court has imposed common sense on the NEPA process. The court's decision started by emphasizing that NEPA's procedural requirements have a particular focus on requiring agencies to undertake analysis of the environmental impact of their proposals and actions. The court then turned to the facts before it, which involved the president's decision to lift a long-standing moratorium on Mexican motor carriers operating in the United States. Before that decision could take effect, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration had to promulgate new safety rules for the Mexican carriers. But that was all FMCSA could do. It had no statutory authority to impose or enforce emissions controls or to establish environmental requirements unrelated to motor carrier safety. Okay, I'm going to pause right here. Why are they comparing a national agency to the United States wanting authority over national environmental regulation in the United States to the United States companies doing business with Mexico? But that's just me. I feel like those are different. That's totally different jurisdiction in my opinion. Like what? But that's just me. Maybe I don't know enough about the law to know why that case should be comparable, but that's just me. All right, and then it says, because, oh, and also I have not been quoting or citing the sources or like legal case shit in here. Fuck that. Anyway, it says because FMCSA's role was limited to enforcing motor carrier safety, its NEPA review did not consider any environmental impact that might be caused by the increased presence of Mexican trucks within the United States. Yet when FMCSA's safety rules were challenged, the Court of Appeals found that the agency's NEPA review had failed to give adequate consideration to the overall environmental impact of lifting the moratorium on Mexican trucks. This court unanimously reversed. In doing so, the court recognized that it would be impossible for Mexican trucks to operate in the United States until FMCSA issued its rules. Still, it found that those rules were not the cause of the truck's overall impact. The court based this finding on the principle that NEPA requires a reasonably close causal relationship between the environmental effect and the alleged cause. But for causation was not enough. And since FMCSA lacked the ability categorically to prevent trucks from entering the country, it did not cause the environmental effects of those trucks' cross-border operations. The court summarized its holding this way. Where an agency has no ability to prevent a certain effect due to its limited statutory authority over the relevant actions, the agency cannot be considered the legally relevant cause of the effect. B. Factual background. Public citizen was central to the Surface Transportation Board's decision to authorize construction and operation of the new rail line here, the Uintah Basin Railway. That railway will serve the Uintah Basin, a 12,000 square mile area in the northeast Utah and northwest Colorado that is isolated by the mountain ranges and plateaus of the Western Rockies. Though the Basin is about the same size as Maryland, the only way to reach it today is over 2-lane roads that cross high mountain passes. This inaccessibility makes it hard for people living in the Basin to participate in the broader economy. If the Basin were less isolated, it would change people's lives. The Basin is filled with untapped natural resources, including valuable minerals, natural gas, and waxy crude oil. The Basin's farmers and ranchers grow alfalfa, corn, and cattle, but without better infrastructure, these products can never reach the rest of the country. At the same time, products from the rest of the country cannot easily reach the people living in the Basin. These choke points raise costs for everyone, blocking diverse trade and throttling the Basin's economy. I'm just going to pause here real quick. I feel like the reasons that we would need those resources are because we are depleting resources from everywhere else. If we need those resources that bad in relation to what we're depleting, maybe that speaks to we should preserve what the fuck is left and leave it the fuck alone. You know what the fuck I mean? Like, what the fuck is this? Like, how does this logic work? They're just like, nah, forget sustainability. We just need to make more money. What? But money doesn't, what does money do? People are hoarding all of the money, and we could, like, that's just, ugh. Anyway, fucking, sorry, I'm over here, like, about to try and mute and hit play again, but I'm like, wait a minute, no, I'm reading now. Fucking, okay, sorry. Then it says, the Uintah Basin Railway could unlock the Basin's potential by building 88 miles of railroad track from the heart of the Basin to a new connection with the national rail network. The project would bridge the transportation gap that stops farmers, ranchers, manufacturers, and oil producers from selling to wider markets. This railway would carry diverse commodities, improving lives by boosting the Basin's economy. But its initial success depends on its ability to transport the Basin's environmentally superior waxy crude oil to refineries in other parts of the country. Of course, success is not guaranteed. The Uintah Basin Railway is an economic development project sponsored by a unit of state government, Petitioners' 7-county infrastructure coalition. To facilitate the Surface Transportation Board's environmental review of its project, 7 county made high and low estimates of the oil production that the project could support, and thus the number of trains that might travel on the new rail line. It also told the board about refineries around the country where that oil could be delivered, displacing oil from other sources. But Seven County did not have contracts with any of those downstream refineries or with any upstream oil developers. So it had no way of knowing which shippers would use the new rail line, much less where the oil would go. And then C, administrative and judicial proceedings. The Surface Transportation Board started its environmental review of the Uintah Basin Railway in June 2019. After more than a year of study, the board published a draft environmental impact statement describing the environmental effects of 3 alternative rail alignments. The board then revised that draft based on public and agency input, leading to a 3,600-page final settlement in August 2021, more than 2 years after the review began. The board's environmental review confirmed the separateness of any oil development. New oil wells would involve projects that have not yet been proposed or planned, and which could occur on private, state, tribal, or federal land, where they would be studied and regulated by the appropriate agencies. Shouldn't that be illegal, in my opinion? Like, why the fuck are you trying to fuck with tribal land? The whole fucking point is tribal sovereignty. Leave the fucking shit alone. And then it says, the board similarly found that it is not possible to identify specific refineries, also separately regulated, that would receive shipments of oil from the Uintah Basin. Some of those refineries could be in Louisiana. Others could be in Texas, Kentucky, Oklahoma, or Washington. As for the effects of transporting Uintah Basin oil after it leaves the new 88-mile rail line, the board found that the Uintah Basin Railway would connect with the Union Pacific's line. Safety on those lines is regulated by the Federal Railroad Administration, not the board. While the board prepared its environmental review, Petitioners 7 counties sought an exemption from the board's usual regulatory requirements for new road construction. Since the environmental review had by then been underway for nearly a year, 7 County also asked the board to preliminarily address the transportation merits of the new rail line. In January 2021, the board agreed that the Uintah Basin Railway qualified for an exemption, subject to completion of the still ongoing environmental review. Once the environmental review was done, the board made a final decision approving the project. The bulk of that decision was devoted to an analysis of the new rail line's environmental effects. As part of that analysis, the board explained that under public citizen, when an agency has no ability to prevent a certain effect due to its limited statutory authority over the relevant actions, the agency cannot be considered the legally relevant cause of the effect for NEPA purposes. Because the board had no authority or jurisdiction over development of oil and gas in the basin, nor any authority to control or mitigate the impacts of any such development, it concluded that the effects of oil and gas development were not direct effects of the new rail line. Similarly, because the board lacked power to regulate or mitigate impacts caused by other rail carriers' operations in other states, it declined to treat those carriers' operations as indirect effects of the new rail line in the Uintah Basin. Having concluded that its environmental review met NEPA's requirements under public citizen and otherwise, the board approved construction and operation of the new rail line. Board Chairman Oberman dissented. Respondents, Eagle County, Colorado, and a collection of environmental groups led by the Center for Biological Diversity, separately petitioned for review of the board's decision in the D.C. Circuit, which had jurisdiction. Petitioners 7 County Infrastructure Coalition and proposed rail line operator Uintah Basin Railway, LLC, intervened in both cases to defend the board's decision. Since the two petitions raised some of the same issues, the court consolidated them. After briefing and argument, the court vacated and remanded the board's decision. The D.C. Circuit recognized that the board had relied on public citizen to set the scope of its environmental review. But the court rejected the board's reading of that case. It explained that the board cannot avoid its responsibility under NEPA to identify and describe the environmental effects of increased oil drilling and refining on the ground that it lacks authority to prevent, control, or mitigate those developments. To the contrary, the court held, the board's mere authority to deny a new road project on the ground that the railway's anticipated environmental and other costs outweigh its expected benefits meant that the board's argument that it need not consider effects it cannot prevent is simply inapplicable. The D.C. Circuit decision also found inadequate the board's review under the Endangered Species Act and its analysis under the ICC Termination Act, and it affirmed some aspects of the board's environmental review. None of those holdings is at issue here. The Court of Appeals remanded this case to the board for further proceedings, and the board must prepare a new NEPA document before it can address any other issue. Petitioners timely sought, what the fuck does this mean? En banc, sought en banc rehearing of the D.C. Circuit's decision. The court denied their petition on December 4th, 2023. Yeah, all right. And then I think after this, I just wanted to skip to the conclusion. All right, so their conclusion is super quick. It literally just says that the petition for the writ should be granted. And this comes from the Council of Record regarding from Venable LLP and Streamer Law. Can I tell who filed this? Okay, so they're the counsel for the petitioners. And the petitioners, so this is what was filed by the petitioners. So next we're going to read from one of the respondents, which is and I should probably, maybe I should read from Eagle County, Colorado, or Center for Biological Diversity, because they're taking more of a lead on this court case. Let's okay. So what we first read was the petition for the Writ of Certiorari, or whatever the fuck that was called. So we read that first. Secondly, oh god damn it. Okay, sorry. Secondly, let's check out this brief for the respondent, Eagle County. Then we got a brief from the Center of Biological Diversity as well. And we'll just check out those two for now. Okay, so the brief for Eagle County. Let's just see what is different. So let's check out, we're going to check out the introduction and the statement of the case. Oh goddamn! All right. Let's just check out this intro real quick. So, the introduction from the brief filed by Eagle County. It says, Petitioners are asking this court to impose limits on NEPA that have no basis in its text whatsoever, and their request comes at a strange time, after Congress adopted a bipartisan compromise to revise NEPA's text and reform aspects of the NEPA process. The amendment to NEPA makes clear that agencies must study the reasonably foreseeable environmental consequences of their actions before committing themselves, the same standard the Court of Appeals have applied for decades, including here. As a result, some of what petitioners say is uncontroversial. Everyone agreed below that agencies are not required to review effects that are not reasonably foreseeable. But petitioners go much further than that, and much further than Congress's recent amendment. You know what? I got my space heater on because I was cold up in my house earlier. Let me turn this off. Okay, now I'm getting hot. My roommate likes it like way colder than I do, and so I will just fucking turn on my damn space heater and keep my room warm, and the rest of the house to be cold. And that's probably why my energy bill's high sometimes. But I don't always do that. Just like every now and then, I get like sensory overload. Okay, my bad. All right, it said, as a result, some of what petitioners say is uncontroversial. Everyone agreed below that agencies are not required to review effects that are not reasonably foreseeable. But petitioners go much further than that, and much further than Congress's recent amendment. They asked this court to give agencies broad permission not to study the consequences of their actions, even when those consequences affect the environment, are reasonably foreseeable, and bear directly on the decision before the agency. Petitioners offer numerous different formulations of their rule, but ground none of them in the statutory text. The project at issue here, the Uintah Basin Railway, will affect the environment in Respondent, Eagle County, Colorado, in foreseeable, even obvious ways, yet petitioners seek to take them off the NEPA table. The railway's overriding purpose is to transport crude oil onto the national rail network. 9 out of every 10 trains that use it would travel eastbound through Eagle County, doubling the traffic on an existing rail line along the Colorado River. Petitioners claim that whether that doubling of traffic will lead to environmental consequences is imponderable. I'm going to pause here real quick. I love how they were trying to say it was minimal, but here we're seeing it could be double. So, yeah. Anyway, and then it says the agency here, the Surface Transportation Board, certainly did not think so. It recognized that doubling train traffic would increase the incidence of sparks that can cause wildfires and would produce additional train accidents resulting in oil spills, and the environmental consequences of, for example, a derailment of an oil-laden train next to the river are imminently foreseeable. The agency made several case-specific errors in dealing with these downline consequences, as Eagle County argued below and the Court of Appeals recognized, but the agency did not deem them categorically unforeseeable, as petitioners now urge. In a change from the certiorari stage, petitioners attempt to argue that the new view of NEPA also treats these concrete downline impacts as not foreseeable. That comes too late, and as a result, answering the question presented would not change the judgment vacating the NEPA decision. For that reason, combined with petitioners' loss of interest in the supposed circuit split they asked the court to resolve, the court may wish to consider whether their petition was improvidently granted. Even if the court entertained petitioners' belated challenge to these downline impacts, petitioners are wrong on what NEPA requires. Agencies must consider the reasonably foreseeable effects of federal actions, not every effect for which the action is a conceivable but-for cause. Petitioners purport to espouse the foreseeability standard, as Congress itself has done, but would change it beyond recognition by blending in concepts of tort liability and agency primacy. But those limitations are directly contrary to the statute and to this court's case law. First, an agency's obligation to study environmental consequences runs deeper than simply asking, could we be sued in tort for this? Indeed, even the decision that petitioners incorrectly claim all but resolves this case. Oh, and then they're citing Metropolitan Edison, Colorado versus People Against Nuclear Energy. expressly said that it was not reading a tort liability limit into NEPA. And Metropolitan Edison's key holding that NEPA did not require an agency to consider non-environmental harms, such as the psychological harm caused by the fear of a nuclear accident, says little about this case, which involves classic, foreseeable environmental effects, such as wildfires, water contamination, and oil spills. Secondly, an agency cannot ignore a particular environmental effects of its own decision merely because another agency might have some jurisdiction over that issue. To the contrary, NEPA implements a detailed scheme for interagency collaboration, a scheme that the board followed in cooperating with 4 other federal agencies here. The statutory text does not countenance petitioners' pass-the-buck approach. The court should reject petitioners' proposal to dramatically remake NEPA, along with their efforts to rewrite the record below in their attempt to shield from review multiple agency errors that are outside the question presented. And it goes statement of the case, and it brings us more legal background. Let's see how much here. All right. So since this is from the actual county itself and it's their response, I will read the full legal background here. I think, and then I might do like a little break and then keep reading. Alrighty. So, it says statement of the case. First, legal background. A, the National Environmental Policy Act. 1. The National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 embodies a national policy to encourage productive and enjoyable harmony between man and his environment, and to promote effects which will prevent or eliminate damage to the environment and biosphere and stimulate the health and welfare of man. These sweeping policy goals are realized through a set of action-forcing procedures that require that agencies take a hard look at environmental consequences and provide for broad dissemination of relevant environmental information. NEPA's procedures are designed to facilitate a robust discussion among the agency and the public about the potential effects of an agency action. This informational purpose is twofold: to provide the public the assurance that the agency has indeed considered environmental concerns in its decision-making process, and, perhaps more significantly, to provide a springboard for public comment in the agency decision-making process itself. In other words, NEPA ensures that the larger audience can provide input as necessary to the agency making the relevant decisions. Thus, for certain major federal actions significantly affecting the quality of the human environment, an agency must prepare an environmental impact statement. As explained by NEPA's implementing regulations issued by the Council on Environmental Quality, the primary purpose of an environmental impact statement is to serve as an action-forcing device by ensuring agencies consider the environmental effects of their action in decision-making, so that the policies and goals defined in the Act are infused into the ongoing programs and actions of the federal government. To accomplish this goal, an EIS shall provide full and fair discussion of significant effects and shall inform decision makers and the public of reasonable alternatives that would avoid or minimize adverse effects or enhance the quality of the human environment. As originally enacted, NEPA requires an environmental impact statement to include a discussion of, among other factors, the environmental impact of the proposed action and any adverse environmental effects which cannot be avoided should the proposal be implemented. In 2023, in a bipartisan revision of NEPA known as the Builder Act, Congress codified the long-standing doctrine regarding the scope of the effects that an agency must consider. The statute now makes explicit that an environmental impact statement must address the reasonably foreseeable environmental effects of the proposed agency action, and any reasonably foreseeable adverse environmental effects which cannot be avoided should the proposal be implemented. The reasonably foreseeable qualifier comes from CEQ's long-standing regulations, which likewise direct agencies to assess reasonably foreseeable environmental effects. Those regulations define reasonably foreseeable as sufficiently likely to occur such that a person of ordinary prudence would take it into account in reaching a decision. 2. NEPA requires extensive interagency cooperation with respect to preparation of an environmental impact statement. The statement anticipates that one agency's actions will sometimes have environmental effects either regulated by or within the expertise of another agency. The first agency does not get to pass the buck to the second. Rather, by statute, they work together. The lead agency shall consult with and obtain the comments of any federal agency which has jurisdiction by law or special expertise with respect to any environmental impact involved. CEQ regulations further emphasize agency cooperation in the NEPA process and delineate a system of lead and cooperating agencies. When more than one federal agency is involved in the same action, then the participating federal agencies shall determine which agency will be the lead agency based on a set of factors. Among them, which agency has project approval or disapproval authority, the magnitude of each agency's involvement, and the agency's expertise concerning the action's environmental effects. Upon request of the lead agency, any federal agency with jurisdiction by law shall be a cooperating agency, and cooperating agencies with special expertise can be asked to prepare relevant proportions of an environmental impact statement. 3. State and local agencies can also be cooperating agencies, so the environmental impact statement process can incorporate their views and expertise as well. B. Railroad regulation by the Surface Transportation Board. Under the ICC Termination Act of 1995, ICCTA, the Surface Transportation Board has exclusive jurisdiction over the interstate rail network, including transportation by rail carriers and the construction, acquisition, and operation of railway lines. Constructing and operating a new railroad line requires the board's approval. To receive the necessary authorization, a party has two options. The first is to submit an application detailing the proposed use of the line, including certain operational, financial, and environmental data. After entertaining public comment, the board must issue the certificate unless it finds that such activities are inconsistent with the public convenience and necessity. Under an alternative pathway, the one petitioners followed here, a party may seek an exemption from the application process. The board may grant an exemption only if it determines, among other things, that a full application proceeding is not necessary to carry out the transportation policy of 49 U.S.C. 10101. And then they cite some other shit. I don't know. And then it says, and this in turn declares that in regulating the railroad industry, it is the policy of the United States government to take 15 specified actions, including, for example, to operate transportation facilities and equipment without detriment to the public health and safety, and to encourage and promote energy conservation. Thus, in deciding whether to allow a new rail line, the board considers not only competition and efficiency, but also environmental considerations relevant to the public health and safety. The board has authority to deny an exemption petition if the environmental harm caused by the railway outweighs its transportation benefits. For this reason, the board's decision-making The board's decision-making regularly entails assessing environmental consequences, and the board maintains its own in-house experts in an Office of Environmental Analysis, OEA. The board recognizes that it must follow NEPA's requirements, including to prepare an environmental impact statement. The board's regulations specify that an environmental impact statement will normally be prepared for rail construction proposals, except in certain specific circumstances not applicable here. The board also applies its own environmental requirements, which direct an applicant for a rail construction project to submit an environmental report describing a range of effects on land use, energy, air quality, noise, safety, biological resources, and water. The environmental report must include an evaluation of indirect or downline impacts of rail construction when certain thresholds are met, as they were here. The board will include an analysis of potential effects on air quality if a decision will result in an increase of either 3 or 8 trains on a day on a given line, depending on whether certain pollutants in the relevant areas exceed air quality standards. The board has determined that these same 3 or 8 train thresholds should govern the board's review of downline safety issues, and it regularly applies these thresholds to define the downline study area for a particular project. And it goes into 2. Factual background. A. The board prepares an environmental impact statement and approves the railway. In May 2020, petitioners sought approval from the board to build a railway to connect the Uinta Basin in northeast Utah to the national rail network. No one disputes that the predominant and expected primary purpose of the railway is to transport waxy crude oil produced in the Uinta Basin. The railway would connect at Koch, Utah to an existing railway line operated by the Union Pacific Railroad Company, the Union Pacific or UP line. Crude oil shipped out of the Uinta Basin on the railway and bound for points east, which would be 90% of the oil, would have no way to travel except by the UP line between Koch and Denver, Colorado. For about half of that stretch, including the portion crossing Respondent Eagle County, the UP line follows the upper Colorado River. Thus, 9 out of 10 trains carrying crude oil out of the Uinta Basin would take the UP line along the Colorado River and cross through the county. Each train can be nearly 2 miles in length. 2. Petitioners sought an exemption for the railway under 49 U.S.C. blah, 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 blah. The board's OEA determined that an environmental impact statement was necessary, set the scope of study for the environmental impact statement based on public input, and published a draft environmental impact statement on October 30th, 2020. During the comment period, the board received over 1,900 submissions. The final environmental impact statement followed on August 6, 2021. As relevant to the county, the environmental impact statement identified a set of downline impacts, referring to impacts that could occur along existing rail lines as a result of increased rail traffic due to the addition of new trains originating or terminating on the proposed rail line. Increased rail traffic would have the greatest impacts on the segment of the existing UP rail line between Koch and Denver, because this segment is the longest existing rail line segment in the downline study area and would receive the most new rail traffic if the proposed rail line were constructed. OEA calculated that the UP line would experience an increase in traffic of up to 9.5 additional trains per day. And based on that forecast, OEA determined that some downline impacts are reasonably foreseeable. Relying on national data for train accident rates, OEA determined that the UP line would experience a significant increase in the risk of rail accidents, ranging from a 40% jump in a low traffic scenario to more than 2 times the current risk in a high traffic scenario. This increase translates to up to 0.89 additional predicted accidents per year involving a loaded oil train on the UP line. In other words, accidents involving a loaded crude oil train would occur slightly less than once per year under the high rail traffic scenario as a result of construction of the railway. OEA further determined that approximately 26% of these accidents would result in an oil spill. Put slightly differently, once every 4 years, the environment adjacent to the Union Pacific line will face an oil spill. And given the size of a train, the vast majority, almost 75% of those spills, will involve 30,000 gallons or more of oil. The environmental impact statement also discussed the increased risk of wildfires near the UP line. As OEA explained, trains can contribute to wildfires by providing an ignition source. Most commonly exhaust sparks, carbon particles emitted from the locomotive engine, or matter from overheated brakes. Among other factors, grade changes, which are unavoidable as a train crosses the Rocky Mountains, for instance, are a significant factor for exhaust spark fires. Matter from overheated brakes also starts fire. OEA recognized that trains originating or terminating on the railway could be an ignition source for wildfires among existing rail lines outside of the study area. Despite that, OEA reasoned that because those existing rail lines are active rail lines that have been in operation for many years, construction and operation of the proposed rail line would not introduce a new ignition source for wildfires along the downline segments. OEA also determined that there was a low probability that a train would cause a wildfire based on historic data on the causes of wildfires in Utah between 1992 and 2015. OEA thus concluded that the downline wildfire impact of the proposed rail line would not be significant. What I don't understand, though, is they're basically saying, well, when we had half as many trains, then the impact was less. So if we add more trains, the impact will be more than, you know what I'm saying? That increases the impact, but that's just, okay. Then it says, the environmental impact statement notably did not evaluate the effect of the downline increase in rail traffic on the Colorado River, despite its proximity to the UP line along much of the relevant stretch. Rather, OEA's analysis of the impacts on water resources pertained solely to the area directly adjacent to the new railway in Utah, specifically the watershed study area that the railway itself would cross, along with a 1,000-foot wide corridor among much of the rail's center line. 3. Following issuance of the final environmental impact statement, the board granted petitioners' exemption petition and authorized construction and operation of the railway in December 2021. The board determined that the transportation merits of the project outweighed the environmental impacts, largely adopting OEA's environmental analysis from the EIS. So they're basically saying if we make enough money, who cares what it does to the environment? Is that what's happening? Fuck that shit. And then it says, the board adopted OEA's reasonable analysis concerning wildfires, including its analysis that because the existing rail lines are active rail lines that have been in operation for many years, construction and operation of the line would not introduce a new ignition source for wildfires along the downline segments. The board did not separately discuss the environmental impact statement's analysis of effects from downline rail accidents, nor did it address the potential impact on the Colorado River. Board member Oberman dissented on the basis that the project's environmental impacts outweigh its transportation merits. B. The board's decision and environmental impact statement are vacated on multiple grounds. The county and several environmental organizations petitioned for review of the board's decision. The D.C. Circuit granted the petitions in part, denied them in part, vacated the underlying order and part of the environmental impact statement, and remanded to the board. The Court of Appeals agreed with the county that the board made several foundational errors in assessing the railway's downline impacts. none of the court's analysis of downline impacts turned on foreseeability. First, the court concluded that OEA erred in determining that the downline wildfire impact of the proposed rail line would not be significant. OEA's determination rested on the conclusion that the construction and operation of the railway would not introduce a new ignition source for wildfires along the downline segments, because the rail liners are active rail lines that have been in operation for many years. The court characterized this conclusion as utterly unreasoned, not the hard look that NEPA requires. Regardless of whether new trains are a new type of ignition source, the court explained that the significant increase in the frequency of which existing ignition sources travel, the Union Pacific Line, up to 9.5 new trains a day, equally poses an increased risk of fire. Secondly, the Court of Appeals agreed with the county that the board erred, by failing to evaluate adverse impacts on downline water resources, in particular the sensitive Colorado River that parallels the Union Pacific Line. As the court explained, the record had no evidence that the board even considered the potential impacts on water resources downline of running up to 9.5 loaded trains a day on the Pacific Union Line, about 50% of which abuts the Colorado River, even though the county, the state of Colorado, and others had squarely raised those concerns. Discussing the effect of an oil spill in the Colorado River, a water supply for millions. Indeed, the board conceitedly failed altogether to mention the Colorado River in the final environmental impact statement's discussion of impacts on water resources. Again, this analysis was not the hard look NEPA requires. Finally, the Court of Appeals concluded that the board erred by modeling the risk of rail accidents based on generalized national data. As the court explained, OEA failed to account for the particular likelihood of derailment for long trains carrying oil through the Mountain West. It also assumed, with no foundation, that accident rates for loaded trains would be the same as those for empty trains. When commenters identified this problem, OEA shrugged that insufficient data exists on the accident rates for oil trains. But when relying on a lack of information, the Court of Appeals held the environmental impact statement must at least explain why the information was unavailable and what actions the agency took to address that unavailability. Outlining process for contending with incomplete or unavailable information relevant to an environmental impact statement. Once again, OEA thus failed to take a hard look at the increased risk of rail accidents downline, given the increased rail traffic resulting from the railway. I'm over here burping, my bad. 2. Separately from its discussion of downline impacts, the Court of Appeals concluded that OEA erred in failing to consider the impacts of increased crude oil refining along the Gulf Coast. The court disagreed with OEA that these effects were not reasonably foreseeable, and further rejected the argument that OEA was not required to consider these effects on the basis that it could not regulate or mitigate these impacts. 3. In light of the significant deficiencies in the board's analysis, the Court of Appeals concluded that the board had improperly approved the railway. As the court explained, the poor environmental review alone renders arbitrary the board's consideration of the relevant rail policies in the final order's exemption of the railway. The court therefore vacated the underlying approval and part of the environmental impact statement and remanded the case to the board. So let's check out the summary of the argument. Maybe this is what I should have read instead of all of that. Okay, we're just going to read the summary. I'm not going to read the actual argument itself. I really ain't got time for all that. It's all linked in the description of the video. But the summary of the argument says, the court should affirm the D.C. Circuit vacator of the board's analysis of downline impacts in Colorado. The board properly concluded that certain downline impacts were reasonably foreseeable and therefore needed to be included in the board's evaluation of whether to approve the railway. The board erred, however, by relying on demonstrably incorrect assumptions or otherwise faulty premises when evaluating the magnitude of those effects. As the DC Circuit recognized, the board's determination, therefore, failed to comply with NEPA's well-established hard look requirement. There is no basis for disturbing the straightforward, highly fact-bound component of the decision below. 1. Petitioners' belated objection to the DC Circuit's evaluation of downline impacts in Colorado is not properly before the court. The petition for certiorari limited its challenges to the DC Circuit's holding that the board erred in declining to consider the upstream and downstream effects of oil and gas development. While the DC Circuit's analysis of this issue was correct, it does not bear on the separate, highly fact-bound question whether the board correctly evaluated downline impacts. For example, wildfires, rail accidents, and water contamination in Colorado. Critically, until petitioners' opening brief before this court, no one, the board included, questioned whether these downline impacts were reasonably foreseeable and, therefore, properly part of the board's analysis. Regardless of the answer to the question presented, this court should not disturb the DC Circuit's vacator with respect to downline impacts. 2. Petitioners' approach to NEPA is wrong. Particularly after the Builder Act, petitioners have no choice but to accept that NEPA requires agencies to evaluate the reasonably foreseeable impacts of a federal action. As reflected both by decades of circuit precedent and by CEQ regulations, whether an effect is reasonably foreseeable turns on the materiality of information for the decision maker. If an effect is sufficiently likely to occur that a prudent person would take into account in reaching a decision, then it is reasonably foreseeable. This standard does not and should not mirror the scope of private tort liability. The purpose of NEPA is to inform both the agency and the public of the impacts of a particular project. Limiting this review to effects that could give rise to tort liability flouts NEPA's directive to consider indirect effects and more fundamentally conflicts with NEPA's goal of ensuring that the agency and the public writ large are informed of the reasonably foreseeable outcomes of a project. Nor is the scope of NEPA review properly limited to those effects over which the lead agency has exclusive or even primary jurisdiction. As reflected by this case, NEPA includes a comprehensive scheme for cooperation among both state and federal agencies. When a particular effect falls within the expertise of a different agency, NEPA contemplates that the agency will participate in the environmental impact statement process as a cooperating agency and not, as petitioners appear to contemplate, that an effect can simply fall by the wayside, because it is not in the wheelhouse of the agency in charge of the environmental impact statement. 3. Applying these well-established standards, the DC Circuit correctly determined that the board erred in its evaluation of downline impacts. As the court recognized, OEA's evaluation of the magnitude of these impacts rested on a series of fundamental errors. Nothing in petitioners' amorphous concept of foreseeability or their references to the rule of reason justifies ignoring these significant defects in the agency's NEPA analysis. First, OEA disregarded the increased risk of wildfires from the significant increase in train traffic. OEA concluded that additional trains crossing the Union Pacific Line would not be a new type of ignition source, but as OEA recognized elsewhere in the same EIS, the increased risk comes from the greater frequency of trains. Second, OEA entirely failed to evaluate the effect that the increase in rail traffic will have on the Colorado River, even though the river abuts half of the UP line. the board's post hoc suggestion that it could use OEA's evaluation of the impacts on waterways in Utah as a stand-in is both procedurally improper and factually flawed. Finally, OEA incorrectly evaluated the risk of accidents, a fundamental underpinning of its entire review of downline effects, by relying on national rates of derailment. This project would involve a significant increase in long trains loaded with crude oil traversing difficult terrain in the Mountain West. Given these three significant errors, the D.C. Circuit properly vacated on the portion of the environmental impact statement evaluating downline impacts in Colorado. We're going to skip the argument here. And, yeah. I don't even know what the fuck half of this shit means anyway. So we're going to scroll on down here and let's check on the conclusion. Let's see. Yeah, it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to process all of this today. Where's this? Let's check out that conclusion. Maybe I shouldn't be scrolling. I could have totally done this more efficiently, but whatever, we're here now. So the conclusion, if the court does not dismiss the writ, the judgment should be affirmed. Respectfully submitted. And this is from Goodwin Law, from Goodwin Protector, from the county. Okay. So this is a brief for the respondent. So I don't know enough about the law to think that I'm getting this right, and this is my first time reading and processing all of this, so I'm probably very wrong. But what I think is happening is basically 7 County wanted to build their fucking shit. Eagle County, the state was through their agencies was doing their checks and balances, making sure, you know, they were going to be good for the environment or not too bad for the environment. Turns out there's some issues, so those issues were reported, and it looks like these bitches are trying to basically say, well, we don't care about those issues because we want to fucking make money anyway. And so they're over here arguing, well, money doesn't give a shit. Who cares about money because you're about to fuck this shit up? You know what I'm saying? And a bunch of other policy shit is happening that I really haven't studied enough about the law to fully process. But I think that's kind of what's happening. What I'm confused on, or what I haven't processed or don't understand yet, is when it comes to these decisions here, like when it went to the court where they're asking for some decisions to stay and some decisions to be overturned or whatever, is that have to do with because how they were saying some of the things that they liked and some of it they didn't like? So there was a judgment that they want affirmed. I don't know. But yeah. So next we're going to check out. So first we just checked out the brief for the respondent of Eagle County. Next we're going to check out the environmental respondent's brief. So yeah, but before we check out this environmental respondent's brief, please check out our word from Ink by Cast Tattoo. Okie dokie. So, with the environmental respondents brief, I feel like they're going to have very similar things here to say. So what I'll probably do, instead of reading the introduction and the argument, I think I'm just going to read the summary of the argument. Let's see, should I read this introduction? I probably won't read. I might read this introduction, but I don't think I'm going to read the statement this time. I'm not going to read the statement this time. I think I'm just going to read the introduction, the summary of the argument, and the conclusion this time. Alrighty, so let's check that out. So introduction. Over and over again, the National Environmental Policy Act tells agencies to consider whether their actions will have long-term and potentially irreversible environmental effects. And so early on, a settled understanding of agencies' obligations under the statute emerged. Agencies must consider the environmental effects of a proposed action that are reasonably foreseeable and within their discretion to consider. In the context of NEPA's environmental review provisions, reasonably foreseeable effects are those that are sufficiently likely to occur and capable of being considered in sufficient detail. If an effect is speculative, or if an agency does not have access to information that would allow it to consider the effect, then the agency need not do so. 50 years of experience with this framework gives agencies direction on which effects they must consider, and a deferential standard of review applies if questions arise. This framework led to a sensible result below. The project here is a railway that would connect waxy crude oil reserves in the Uinta Basin to the national rail network, on which the crude would travel to a few specialized refineries. The Surface Transportation Board knew the railway would significantly increase crude production. It pegged economic benefits in the basin to that increase. And it knew which refineries would likely receive the crude. It identified those refineries to project where trains carrying basin crude would travel. Yet it declined to consider how increased production would affect wildlife and vegetation in the basin, or how increased refining would affect air quality near those refineries. The board had undisputed statutory authority to weigh those effects in deciding whether to approve the railway. The effects were likely. After all, the point of the railway was to increase basin production, and the board had sufficient information to consider those effects. The court below held that the board had to do so or explain why it could not. Petitioners think that it makes no sense to ask a railway agency to consider these kinds of environmental effects. But agencies have long understood that NEPA requires them to consider, at a minimum, the environmental effects of the outcomes that their proposed actions are designed to achieve. The board's predecessor agency did just that 50 years ago, when the Interstate Commerce Commission considered a 150-mile railway that would connect coal mines in Wyoming's eastern Powder River Basin to the national rail network. It recognized that development and mining of the vast coal reserves would be a major secondary impact resulting from railroad construction, and that coal exports from the basin would increase significantly. And so the commission considered the reasonably foreseeable environmental effects of those outcomes. NEPA's basic commands have not changed since its enactment. When amending the statute just last year, Congress brought the long-standing reasonable foreseeability test into NEPA's express text. Though Congress began with a bill that would have imposed new limits on the effects that agencies must consider, it chose not to enact those limits. Petitioners asked this statement to do what Congress did not, and pencil in new limits on agencies' environmental review. Their view of what those limits should be has shifted during this case. But what has remained steady is this: petitioners' arguments are inconsistent with NEPA's text, with long history of agency practice under the statute and with the statutory design. This court should affirm. And then let's see, there should be something about arguments. Oh, summary. Okie dokie. A summary of the argument. 1. Since NEPA's enactment, agencies have applied a reasonable foreseeability test to determine which environmental effects of a proposed action they must consider under the Act. Under that test, an agency asks whether an effect is sufficiently likely to occur and can be described in sufficient detail. If the answer is yes, then an agency must consider that effect under NEPA's environmental review provisions. This test both implements NEPA's express text and accommodates its implicit rule of reason. The statute directs agencies to study environmental effects to the fullest extent possible, and it tells agencies to consider both immediate effects and secondary effects that might occur later in time or further away. At the same time, courts have recognized that the Act should not be read to make it impossible for agencies to comply. The reasonable foreseeability test requires agencies to conduct the forecasting that NEPA's text requires but cuts off speculation about effects that are not likely enough to permit discussion in some detail. As the federal government's consistent, long-standing practice under NEPA, the reasonably foreseeability test is especially deserving of respect. And then they cite Loper Bright, Enterprise versus Raimondo. What a joke. And then it says, half a century of accumulated precedent under this test has shown that it is workable and leads to sensible results. Decisions assessing reasonable foreseeability have established a spectrum. At one end, if the very reason a project is being proposed is to achieve a certain result, the environmental effects of that result will ordinarily be reasonably foreseeable, and an agency must consider them. Agencies have done so since NEPA's early days, considering, for example, the environmental effects of spills from transporting oil to a proposed new deep-water port, and of air pollution from the end use of that oil at onshore refineries. At the other end, if an effect is so attenuated from the proposed action as to be speculative, then the agency need not consider it. Between these poles, the test turns on the proposed action at issue and the information available to the agency. In every case, an agency's conclusion on reasonable foreseeability is reviewed under the familiar, differential, arbitrary, and capricious standard. Congress recently amended NEPA to bring the reasonable foreseeability test and other limits on environmental review that this court has identified into NEPA's express text. Congress began with a bill that would have narrowed the sets of effects an agency must consider under NEPA, but declined to enact that language. Instead, Congress chose to amend the statute to expressly refer to reasonably foreseeable environmental effects. NEPA now expressly excludes from its environmental review requirement actions for which Congress has stripped an agency of discretion to take, or for which Congress has directed the agency to not consider environmental effects when acting. 2. Petitioners persuaded this court to grant certiorari to address whether a direct authority to regulate tests govern whether an agency must study a given environmental effect. They appear to abandon that test now, and rightfully so. NEPA's text forecloses it. The statute requires agencies to consult with agencies that have jurisdiction by law or special expertise with respect to any environmental impact involved. The test would also reintroduce the problem that NEPA aimed to stop, of agencies relying on generalized notions of their relatively limited statutory remit, to decline to consider reasonably foreseeable environmental effects. Petitioners' new argument that NEPA incorporates tort law, concepts of proximate causation, wholesale is also wrong. I said concepts instead of concepts. Tort law concepts of proximate causation wholesale is also wrong. Petitioners proceed by asking whether the board might be liable in tort for the effects as issue, but this court has twice rejected that move. In Metropolitan Edison, and again in Public Citizen, this court found it useful to analogize to proximate causation when explaining its interpretation of NEPA. But both decisions stressed that this was only a qualified analogy. NEPA's underlying policies or legislative intent are what matters, not suggestions that any cause-effect relation too attenuated to merit damages in a tort suit would also be too attenuated to merit study. This court should not discard its earlier wisdom in offering only a qualified analogy to proximate causation. NEPA's text shows that the statute does not share the same concerns that tort law does, and that proximate causation was designed to address. NEPA is a forward-looking statute, one that reflects the political branch's judgment that there is value in understanding the potential environmental effects of agency actions, even if an agency chooses to proceed despite those effects. In stark contrast, the tort law concept of proximate causation is all about liability for violating rules about how to act. At bottom, there is a fundamental mismatch between this tort law concept, which exists to limit liability, and NEPA, which exists to increase agencies' consideration of environmental effects. Beyond disregarding NEPA's text and undermining its goals, importing the tort law concept of proximate causation into NEPA will have other costs. Even in its tort law home, proximate causation is famously slippery. Petitioners' test would generate endless litigation over how to apply tort law principles to NEPA. Petitioners themselves cannot settle on a formulation here, offering at least 11 descriptions of factors or tests for this court's consideration. And although petitioners profess fealty to proximate causation, they use terms that tort law has long rejected. The disconnect between how tort law proximate causation works and how petitioners would have it work under NEPA suggests that they are simply asking this court to rewrite the statute. That, combined with this fast and loose nature of petitioners' test, shows that, at bottom, petitioners object to NEPA itself. Their policies concerns are properly addressed to Congress. That is especially so where, as here, the political branches have a long record of addressing those concerns, including in amendments enacted just last year. So yeah, basically what I'm hearing is they're trying to apply a law that would limit their responsibility for the environmental impact to the case, but that it's not applicable because it's about their responsibility, basically, huh? Anyway. 3. Though federal respondents agree that this court should reject petitioners' new test, they offer their own new gloss on reasonable foreseeability. Under it, if environmental effects are more attenuated, speculative, contingent, or otherwise insufficiently material, the agency need not consider them at all or may give them only limited consideration. This court should reject this new gloss too, because the reasonable foreseeability test excludes consideration of environmental effects that are too attenuated, speculative, or contingent to allow for consideration. It already excludes consideration of effects that are insufficiently material to environmental review under NEPA. Federal respondents' application of their proposed gloss here shows that it would exclude consideration of undeniably material environmental effects. As this case comes to the court, the effects at issue are reasonably foreseeable, meaning they are sufficiently likely to occur and can be discussed in sufficient detail, and are effects that the board can consider under the Termination Act when deciding whether to approve the railway. The effects are thus material in every sense relevant to NEPA, and yet federal respondents would have this court say that the board did not need to consider them. 4. If this court adopts a new test for determining which environmental effects an agency must study under NEPA, it should follow its ordinary course and allow the court below to apply it in the first instance. Petitioners and federal respondents' arguments have shifted so much and so often during this case, and the court below has not had a chance to apply their many proposed new tests. This court should affirm. And then let's just read that conclusion. Is the conclusion even worth reading, that last sentence? Like, why do I even want to read it? It just doesn't feel finished unless I do, huh? But anyway, it just says the conclusion, the judgment of the Court of Appeals should be affirmed. Okay. Alrighty. So I'm going to take, we just left off there. We're at here. Where are we going now? I think next Yes. Okay. So next up, I want to check out two of the documents. They may have submitted more, but I only saw so far. I only saw so far the yeah. Sorry. So we're gonna read the petition for the writ certiorari to the appeals or whatever, the brief or whatever. We're gonna read two briefs. I don't really know enough about the law to know what these are properly called, but we're gonna read two briefs from the Ute Indian Tribe next. But before we do that, I'm gonna take a quick break. So we're gonna do a quick break. I'm gonna be back in about 15 minutes, and then we're going to finish off by checking out a couple of briefs published by the Ute Indian Tribe of the Uintah and Ouray Reservation. And then we're going to look at some case law regarding Ute tribal sovereignty and treaty violation, in my opinion, potentially as it relates to this case. So yeah, I am going to fucking be right back. I appreciate you. I'll be back in 15 minutes. Oops, I forgot to unmute. Okie dokie. So, fucking, it's been a second. So what I was doing was trying to go through and add some sources and stuff. I need to go add some dates, but I was trying to go add some links in the description of this video and just take a little break and stuff. Alrighty, so we're gonna wrap up by speaking about the Ute Indian Tribe and how they are currently being impacted by this environmental potential crisis happening here, or series of crises. What's the fucking plural crisis? Anyway, so there was a couple of briefs submitted by the Ute Indian Tribe that I wanted to check out. So for these, we're going to check out the interest of the Amici Curiae, the summary of the argument, and the conclusion. Honestly, I might just read... Shit. Honestly? Let me look at the legal share real quick. I should have done this while I was on break, but I was busy adding these links. I might end up reading this whole fucking thing, but let's see here. Okie dokie. So we're gonna start with the first one. We're gonna start with the brief Amici Curiae of the Ute Indian Tribe of the Uintah and Ouray Reservation, Western States and Tribal Nations Natural Gas Initiative in support of Petitioners document. So first we've got the interest of the Amici Curiae. The Ute Indian Tribe of the Uintah and Ouray Reservation. The Ute Indian Tribe is a sovereign, federally recognized Indian tribe composed of 3 bands of the Greater Ute Tribe: the Uintah Band, the White River Band, and the Uncompahgre Band. I am so sorry. I feel like I did not say that right. I apologize, guys. This is indigenous erasure. Okay. So then I said, who today live on the Uintah and Ouray Reservation in northeastern Utah. The Uintah and Ouray Reservation is in Uinta Basin, the area which would be serviced by the common carrier rail line that is at issue in this case. The Uintah and Ouray Reservation includes lands in Uintah, Deschutes, Carbon, Wasatch, and Summit counties in Utah. Cattle raising and mining of oil and natural gas is big business on the reservation. About the Utes, available at utetribe.com. Western States and Tribal Nations Natural Gas Initiative is a state, county, and tribal government-led 501c4 initiative working to facilitate economic development and tribal sovereignty through the development of domestic and global markets for natural gas produced in the western United States. Summary of argument. The petition for writ of certiorari presents an open conflict between the circuits on an important issue of law under the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA. Unlike most of the petitions for writ of certiorari this court receives, the court need not rely upon arguments of counsel to determine that this conflict exists. The circuits themselves acknowledge that they are in conflict. The United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit has adopted the minority position on this conflict. The 11th Circuit further noted that the legal analysis of the 2-judge majority in the D.C. Circuit decision in Sierra Club versus Frickerman is questionable at best. It fails to take seriously the rule of reason announced in Public Citizen, or to account for the untenable consequences of its decision. The 11th Circuit agreed with the strong dissent in Sierra Club. Here, petitioners supplied for authorization of a spur railroad line into the Uinta Basin in Utah. That railroad would dramatically improve the economy and the lives of the Ute Indian Tribe and others who live in the Uinta Basin. I think that should have been Basin. Or am I correcting them? Which, that could have been a typo, who knows? And then it says the application was submitted to the Surface Transportation Board. And the STB did take seriously this court's holding in Public Citizen. The STB properly limited its NEPA analysis to its important but narrow role within the federal government. Its decision, my computer's making noise. Okay, sorry. Wait, what the fuck was I reading? Hold up, my bad. The STB properly limited its NEPA analysis to its important but narrow role within the federal government. Ugh. God, life is hard. Reading is difficult, guys. Its decision was proper under public citizen and would be proper in the majority of the circuits which have reached the issue. But the D.C. Circuit held the STB should have gone much further, far afield from the STB's limited role in the federal government, invading the province of other federal and state agencies, and invading the province of the legislative branch regarding national energy policy. Because a large percentage of NEPA cases can be filed in the District of Columbia, the D.C. Circuit's erroneous decision is the de facto rule that agencies now must follow throughout the United States. This court should grant the petition and determine whether the D.C. Circuit's minority position is correct. Am I really trying to read two things at the same time? Why, yes. Yes, I am. Okay, my bad. Argument 1. Legal and factual background. The Ute Indian Tribe seeks, I feel like I'm saying this wrong, I'm sorry. The Ute Indian Tribe seeks to provide governmental services for its members and for its large but sparsely populated reservation. It seeks to provide health care, education. I know how to say education, I swear. I was reading education and housing and was like combining the words. Education, housing, and other services. Unlike other governments, it cannot effectively pay for services through tax receipts. Even if it wanted to, its lands are too sparsely populated to provide much income from tourism, gaming, or similar activities. What it does have, by fate or good luck, is substantial quantities of superior waxy crude oil. But by fate or bad luck, it does not have the same access to markets as other oil fields in the United States. Gaining that access would improve the income of the tribe and its members. As discussed below, the tribe would have gained that access under the court decisions in the majority of the circuits which have reached the issues. You know what? Honestly, if anyone's going to profit off of oil, it really should be indigenous people. Like, come on. If we're going to do it. All right. And it says the three bands that make up the Ute Indian Tribe of the Uintah and Ouray Reservation, the Uinta, White River, and is it Uncompahgre? Uncompahgre? Is it Uncompahgre? Uncompahgre. 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 If I am saying this wrong, I apologize. Originally occupied the land between present-day Denver and Salt Lake. The Uintah Band occupied land in present-day Utah, including land in the Uinta Basin and northern Utah. The White River and Uncompahgre bands occupied northwestern and central western Colorado, including all the land now in Eagle County, Colorado. Following the Meeker incident in 1879, the non-Indian Coloradans, led by Colorado Governor Frederick Petition, adopted the rallying cry, "The Utes must go," asserting the United States should forcibly remove the Uncompahgre and White River bands from Colorado. Peter R. Decker, "The Utes must go." Oh, exciting. My bad. I'm bad at reading those. And then it says, one reason Coloradans wanted the White River and Uncompahgre bands removed or exterminated was to open land for the main line east to west railroad relevant to this case, the railroad through Eagle County, Colorado. Pitkin to J. Gold. Oh, God damn it, another fucking source. Then it says Eagle County, Colorado, and the coalition of environmental groups aligned with them now have the audacity and shamelessness to assert that permitting oil, agricultural products, or anything else that a common carrier railroad might transport from present-day Ute lands to pass over that very same rail line is a great ill which must be prevented. The executive branch, in defiance of the Act of June 15, 1880, forcibly marched the bands from Colorado to the Uintah Valley Reservation in Utah and an adjoining replacement reservation for the Uncompahgre band in Utah, Ute Indian Tribe. Oh, another source. And then it says the area from which the non-Indians forced the Utes now contains common carrier rail lines, interstate roadways, commercial airports, cities, oil, and hard mineral producing lands, fertile agricultural lands, etc. It contains substantial oil fields and agricultural lands that are connected to the United States rail infrastructure. It is firmly tied to the United States economic and transportation infrastructure. All of Eagle County, Colorado was originally Ute lands. The unemployment rate in Eagle County it's Ute, like cute, but Ute. I feel like I know in my head how it should be said, but I can't say it right. I apologize. Ute lands. The unemployment rate in Eagle County is under 3%. Eagle County includes Vail, Colorado, where average home prices are over $2 million. It also includes Minturn, named after the vice president of the railroad company that bought a railroad line to that town and others in that area. In contrast, the Uinta Basin has to date proven too remote and too difficult to access. It has only 2-lane road from east to west, an airport with only 2 small commercial flights per day, no rail access, no ski resorts or chalets for the rich and famous. For some parts of the Uinta Basin, it is a 3-hour drive, in good weather, to the nearest 4-lane road. The United States and Colorado knew that much of the Uinta Basin was and would remain a remote high desert. Before the United States permitted a reservation to be established in the Uinta Basin, the Utah Territorial Indian Superintendent dispatched a survey team to determine whether the proposed reservation lands would be suitable for non-Indian settlement. The team's unanimous and firm verdict was that the proposed reservation lands were one vast contiguity of waste, immeasurably valueless, except for nomadic purposes, hunting grounds for Indians, and to hold the road together. It says the Uncompahgre Reserve is a desert. Of the 1,933,440 acres embraced, therein not one can be relied on to produce a crop without irrigation, and not more than 3% of the whole is susceptible of being made productive by process of irrigation. The tribe's Uncompahgre Reservation remains one of the least populated areas in the United States. The Uncompahgre Reservation is substantially larger than the state of Delaware. There is only one census area on the Uncompahgre Reservation, and in their most recent decennial census, that census area, Bonanza, dropped from a population of 1 in the 2010 census to a population of 0. Respondents, Eagle County, Colorado, and its aligned NGOs want to keep it that way. I'm assuming that stands for non-government organization, but I don't know. And then it says, unbeknownst to Coloradans for the United States, when the White River and Uncompahgre bands were forcibly removed from their reservations in Colorado to land in Utah, the Uintah Valley Reservation and the Uncompahgre Reservation in Utah contained valuable mineral resources. First, the United States found that the lands contained gilsonite, and Congress took that land from the tribe. Later, the United States discovered the reservation contained one of the largest and best oil fields in the United States. By the time the United States realized the land contained oil, Congress did not have the audacity to take that land. The United States owns most of the land on the tribe's reservation. Similarly, the United States owns much of the land on all Indian reservations, and the United States owns about half of the land west of the Rocky Mountains. Nearly anything occurring on that federally owned land involves federal permitting, leasing, or other federal actions, and therefore requires NEPA review. The tribe is not complaining about NEPA review, but, as will be discussed below, the DC Circuit decision would provide respondents with multiple bites at the same apple and would require agencies to conduct the expansive consideration and issue their own decision, even when they have no authority, jurisdiction, or expertise. Because so much of what occurs on the tribe's reservation and more generally on land west of the Rocky Mountains involves federal action by multiple federal agencies, the DC Circuit's decision would have an inordinate detrimental impact for the tribe and others living west of the Rocky Mountains. Since the early 1900s, there have been efforts to build a railroad that would connect the Uinta Valley to Americans' railway infrastructure. For example, Robert Etheran, Rebel of the Rockies, the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad, 1962, discussing plans for a railroad from Denver to Salt Lake via the Uinta Basin. Utah Department Transportation, Uinta Basin Railroad Feasibility Study Summary Report, January 9, 2015. Here and After 2015 report, discussing a prior feasibility study for the isolated Empire Rail Line in 2001. None of those efforts succeeded. The most recent effort to connect the isolated empire to the United States rail infrastructure began in 2013. 2. Surface Transportation Board duties and proceedings. The Surface Transportation Board is an independent federal agency with a multi-member board. There are approximately 80 independent federal agencies, and there are approximately 70 federal agencies with multi-member boards. The STB has a 5-member board. The board is appointed by the President with the advice and consent of the Senate. It is charged with the economic regulation of various modes of surface transportation, primarily freight rail. Because of that limited function, its members must have experience in transportation, economic regulation, or business. Petitioner submitted a petition for a certificate authorizing petitioner to construct a common carrier spur rail line from a mainline common carrier railroad into the Uinta Basin. Federal statutes provide that upon receipt of a petition to construct a common carrier line, the STB shall issue a certificate authorizing construction unless the board finds that such activities are inconsistent with the public convenience and necessity. Under long-established federal law and policy, a common carrier has a statutory duty to carry any products. The STB, therefore, does not and cannot determine what products or whose products a common carrier line will carry. The products on both the proposed spur line and on the main line are determined by the market. Based upon federal policy codified into statute, any person who is willing to pay to have goods carried is treated on an equal basis by the common carrier. Congress provided further guidance to the STB, which defines through 15 paragraphs the United States Rail Transportation Policy. Paragraph 4 states that the United States policy is to ensure the development and continuation of a sound rail transportation system with effective competition among rail carriers and with other modes to meet the needs of the public and the national defense. The state of Utah completed a preliminary feasibility study for the current proposal in 2015. The STB initiated environmental review of the Uinta Basin Railway proposal in June 2019, and petitioners formally petitioned for a certificate authorizing construction in May 2020. The STB issued its final decision in December 2021. The STB provided a substantial discussion of political environmental effects from the proposed rail line, but consistent with its limited role, freight rail and related surface transportation, It properly rejected respondents' assertions that the board should enforce respondent NGO's desired energy policy under the guise of NEPA review, or respondent Eagle County's attempt to prevent the common carrier railroad passing through Eagle County from carrying more crude oil. Quoting and correctly applying this court's holding from Public Citizen versus Department of Justice, the STB concluded that because the STB does not regulate, and in fact does not even have authority or jurisdiction over development of oil and gas in the Basin, any conjectured future changes to that development of oil and gas were not under its environmental review authority. Instead, any such development was for some other agency or agencies to consider. The STB similarly concluded that because authorization of construction of a common carrier railroad in Utah does not dictate where crude oil will ultimately be refined, conjectured effect of refinement on communities in the Gulf Coast was also not within its authority. 3. The circuit courts are in conflict. Petitioner provides a thorough and correct discussion of the split between the D.C. Circuit and 9th Circuit on one side, and the 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, and 11th Circuits on the other side. As petitioner shows, the split is over how far down the line, non-literally, an agency must look. Amicus Curiae believed Public Citizen provided a clear and easily applied answer to that question. The majority of the circuits hold that an agency meets the procedural requirements for NEPA analysis, and a court therefore cannot vacate and remand to the agency if the agency has adequately considered the environmental consequences which are within its regulatory authority. If the majority circuit position is correct, and it is unless this court is going to overrule its prior unanimous decision in Public Citizen, then the agency was permitted to limit its NEPA analysis to the effects proximately caused by the actions over which they have regulatory responsibility, and its decision to so limit its analysis cannot be vacated by a court. Applying its very different standard, the court below held that the agency was required to engage in a wide-ranging analysis of activities that are not within the STB's regulatory responsibilities, but which are within the regulatory responsibilities of other agencies. Moreover, the court below requires the STB to consider or reconsider possible effects which have been or will be reviewed when those other agencies conduct NEPA review of proposed federal actions within those agencies' responsibilities. For example, the D.C. Circuit chastises the agency for not reviewing how the building of the spur line into the Uinta Valley will impact areas around refineries on the Gulf Coast. That is not the STB's realm. Either those existing refineries already have approved capacity to refine that oil, or they would need to obtain that approval. In either case, proper NEPA review of the refineries will be conducted by an agency with direct responsibility and familiarity. If the existing refineries already have capacity to refine more crude oil, then the environmental effects of increasing production up to that already existing capacity has already been analyzed and authorized. And if those existing refineries were to need to expand at some point in the future, whether because of increased oil from the Uinta Basin or from other existing large oil fields in Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Wyoming, foreign countries, etc., then the effects would be studied at that time. Similarly, if the new rail line were to result in increased applications of permits to drill or other oil production-related federal permits, NEPA review of those actions would be evaluated at that time. The Center for Biological Diversity made the same substantive argument in this current case as it made as appellants in the 11th Circuit. It prevailed in the current case, but it lost in the 11th Circuit, as the 11th Circuit held into rejecting the Center for Biological Diversity's argument. To take an alternative, unbounded view of the public interest review would be to appoint the court de facto environmental policy czar, rather than consider whether the court's own action is in the public interest. That broader view would have the court consider whether fertilizer production and use is really worth the cost. Why am I saying cost? Worth the cost. And that could be just the beginning. The next time the court is asked to approve a section of a gas pipeline running through a wetland, would the court be required to consider whether the country's reliance on fossil fuels is really in the public interest? The split between the circuits is directly at issue in this case. In the quote above, the 11th Circuit thought it was asking a softball question or rhetorical question to show the error of the DC Circuit's prior decisions. But the DC Circuit has yet again answered yes to the question. Under its decision, each of the 70 federal boards not only can, but must, act as if it is the czar over federal energy policy, pesticide use, fertilizer production, etc. Having 70 different unelected czars is, of course, undemocratic. Setting these policies is for Congress, not for 3 or 4 unelected members who constitute the majority on one of the many federal boards. It is also unworkable. For example, as discussed above, if an existing refinery were to seek to expand its refining capacity, it would have to engage in the lengthy NEPA review for that expansion. And the agency with direct authority over that request could conclude that expansion is proper under NEPA. Yet, under the duties forced upon it by the DC Circuit, the STB should deny a permit if they conclude that the approved refinery is harmful. There are about 70 other 3 or 4 majorities of boards which will have similar powers to set policy. My critique here, though, would be like, if one person had the final say on all this shit, though, don't you think they're just going to rule with what makes money? But maybe I'm wrong. But not that I think that's what should be, but that's just like what I've been seeing. Okay, and then it said, the split between the circuits is not going to go away until this court resolves the issue. The DC Circuit has been on its divergent path since at least 2017. The 9th Circuit adopted the DC Circuit's analysis. As the current case illustrates, even though it is in the minority, the DC Circuit is not backing down from its minority position. For the reasons discussed above, the split needs to be resolved. The STB cited and correctly applied the scope of its review under the majority standard, but its decision was then reviewed and vacated under the minority standard. For current purposes, a petition for a writ of certiorari under whether the majority or the minority position is correct is of less importance. The important point is that the conflict needs to be resolved. This court should resolve which standard applies. I think it does kind of matter, but am I wrong for that? I don't know enough about the law. Conclusion, it says for all of the above reasons, the court should grant the petition for a writ of certiorari. I don't know what date. That was posted. I have to figure that. Oh, wait. It has the date right here. Dude, I'm stupid. Okay, I was looking for the date on that. Alright. Oh, that was ableist language of me. You know what? Learning. Working on it. Okay. So, next up, I've got another brief. So the first brief that we just read, I need to add the date and the source here. This one was from April. No, wait. 2024. Yeah, 04, April 5th. Right? I think this is from April 5th. And then this one is from September 4th, I think. Yeah, I can't process life today, but we're just gonna be like good enough. I'm just kidding. But yeah, fucking alright. So now we're gonna read another brief submitted from the Ute Indian Tribe of the Uintah and Ouray Reservation. Okie dokie. So first, interest of the Amici Curiae. Does this repeat? Is this the same? Looks like that first paragraph is the same. Second paragraph's the same. Looks like the third paragraph's the same. Is this just the same document reposted? Am I looking at the same document? Oh, no. Okay, different argument here. Okie dokie. Yeah. All right. So it had the same introduction with the interests of the Amici Curiae, so I'm going to skip that part on this second document, and we're going to start off with a summary of argument here. Here we go. It says, in the United States Department of Transportation versus Public Citizen, this court reiterated two prior limitations on court review of an agency's NEPA decisions. NEPA requires a reasonably close causal relationship between the environmental effect and the alleged cause. The court analogized this requirement to the familiar doctrine of proximate cause from tort law, where an agency has no ability to prevent a certain effect due to its limited statutory authority over the relevant actions. The agency cannot be considered a legally relevant cause of the effect. Hence, under NEPA and the implementing CEQ regulations, the agency need not consider these effects in its EA. For the past 138 years, the Surface Transportation Board and its predecessor have not had statutory authority to determine the shippers who can access a common carrier rail line or the products that can be shipped on a common carrier rail line. Common carriers are required to haul all products, whether solar panels or oil, products from rural areas or urban, without discrimination. But the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit held that when the STB was deciding whether to authorize an 88-mile common carrier spur line, the STB was required to prognosticate how and where the spur line would impact oil production and oil refining. Under the D.C. Circuit's interpretation of the NEPA, the STB had to determine where oil that started on that spur line would be sent for refining, and then determine the environmental impact on the distant communities in which that refining would occur. The D.C. Circuit also required the STB to analyze how the spur line would impact future oil production in the Uinta Basin, and then determine the environmental effects from that future development. As petitioners showed in their opening brief, the D.C. Circuit's decision was directly and unquestionably contrary to this court's prior decisions. Unless this court is going to overturn its prior unanimous statutory interpretation decision in Public Citizen, this court must vacate the D.C. court's decision. This court should reiterate that when an agency has no ability to prevent a certain effect due to its limited statutory authority, Public Citizen, the agency need not consider that effect. Where the agency has considered the effects that are within that agency's statutory authority, that is the end of the judicial inquiry, and the agency's decision withstands NEPA review. 4. Argument 1. Legal and factual background. A. The need for and benefit from a common carrier rail line into the Uinta Basin. All right, you know what? I support the Ute tribe on their tribal authority and sovereignty and what they want for their tribe. So if they do want the rail line, then I hope that works out for them. I just hope it works in their favor out of all of this. You know what I'm saying? Okie dokie. And then it says the Ute Indian Tribe provides governmental services for its members and for its large but sparsely populated reservation. Did I read this already? Oh, yes, I totally read this part. Yes. It looks like the legal and factual background is the same from the other document that we read. So we're going to skip this here because it looks like we read this already. I'm just double checking. Oh, earlier when I said Rio Grande, that was a typo. That should have been Rio Grande. That makes way more sense. Whoops. But in my defense, I was just reading what the fuck was in front of me. Okay, so what we have not read yet is B. The Interstate Commerce Act and the duty of common carriers and the limited jurisdiction and role of the Surface Transportation Board. In 1887, Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Act, the ICA. A core purpose of the ICA was to prohibit interstate railroads from discriminating in the products they hauled. This was a hard-fought policy issue for decades before the passage of the ICA. In the years leading up to the passage of the ICA, much of the concern about harmful discrimination in pricing and access by railroads came from agricultural interests, and many states passed Granger or Granger? I don't know. Granger laws? Shit, I don't know how to say that, which included the same anti-discrimination policy later adopted into the ICA. In the Wabash case, this court substantially limited the effectiveness of state Granger laws. I don't know if that's right or not. Sorry, guys. But it simultaneously reiterated that Congress had the power to pass similar laws. Congress passed the ICA the next year with broad bipartisan support. The ICA was a first in multiple ways. It was the first federal statute regulating an industry. It created the first of the now numerous federal administrative regulatory agencies and boards. It was the first federal regulation to impose duties on common carriers. Congress's policy choice to prevent common carriers from discriminating against products or industries has remained in place since 1887. It applied to trains that have run through Eagle County, Colorado, since that east to west common carrier line began operating. The regulatory agency created by the ICA is now named the Surface Transportation Board. It has a multi-member board. There are approximately 80 independent federal agencies, and there are approximately 70 federal agencies with multi-member boards. Wait a minute, did I read this already? Administrative Conference of the United States Source Board. This is sorting something. Hold on. I feel like I totally... Okay, it added some of it, now, so some of it is, okay. So it looks like a lot of this here is new that we've been reading. I apologize. I'm just going to keep going. Congress's policy choice to prevent common carriers from discriminating against products or industries has remained in place since 1887. It applied to trains that have run through Eagle County, Colorado, since that east to west common carrier line began operating. The regulatory agency created by the ICA is now named the Surface Transportation Board. It has a multi-member board. Did I just read this? My bad. There are approximately 80 independent federal agencies, and there are approximately 70 federal agencies with multi-member boards. Okay. The STB has a 5-member board. The board is appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the Senate. It is charged with the economic regulation of various modes of surface transportation, primarily freight rail. Because of that limited function, its members must have experience in transportation, economic regulation, or business. Petitioners submitted a petition for a certificate authorizing petitioners to construct the common carrier spur rail line from a mainline common carrier railroad into the Uinta Basin. Federal statutes provide that upon receipt of a petition to construct the common carrier line, the STB shall issue a certificate authorizing construction unless the board finds that such activities are inconsistent with the public convenience and necessity. As discussed above, the STB does not and cannot determine what products or whose products a common carrier line will carry. The products on both the proposed spur line and on the main line are determined by the market based upon federal policy codified into statute. Okay, this is totally red. Any person who is willing to pay to have goods carried is treated on an equal basis by the common carrier. Congress provided further guidance to the STB, and which defines through 15 paragraphs. I totally read this. Yes. Okay, I'm skipping the part I'm pretty sure I read already in the other brief. Okie dokie, let's skip to this part. I don't think I read this yet. 2. The DC Circuit erred. In their opening merits brief, petitioners show that the DC Circuit plainly erred, although the respondents will attempt to argue otherwise in their upcoming response. Amicus believes the debate about whether the DC Circuit erred is over. The DC Circuit erred. As petitioners show, the issue presented is how far down the line, non-literally, an agency must look. Amicus emphasized the word must because that is at the core of the DC's court error. Public Citizen provided a clear and easily applied standard. An agency meets the procedural requirements for NEPA analysis, and a court therefore cannot vacate and remand to the agency if the agency has adequately considered the environmental consequences which are within that particular agency's regulatory authority. Under Public Citizen, the agency was permitted to limit its NEPA analysis to the effects proximately caused by the actions over which they have regulatory responsibility, and its decision to so limit its analysis cannot be vacated by a court. Applying its very different standard, the DC Circuit held that the agency was required to engage in a wide-ranging analysis of activities that are not within the STB's regulatory responsibilities, but which are within the regulatory responsibilities of other agencies. Moreover, the DC Circuit required the STB to consider or reconsider possible effects which have been or will be reviewed when those other agencies conduct NEPA review of proposed federal actions within those agencies' responsibilities. For example, the DC Circuit chastises the agency for not reviewing how the building of the spur line into the Uinta Valley will impact areas around refineries on the Gulf Coast. That is not the STB's realm. Either those existing refineries already have approved capacity to refine that oil, or they will need to obtain that approval. In either case, proper NEPA review of the refineries will be conducted by an agency with direct responsibility and familiarity. If the existing refineries already have capacity to refine more crude oil, wait, we totally read this already. Yeah, then it's talking about how then it's gonna be, that's already been analyzed and authorized. We read that already. Sorry, rereading that. Okay. There's been some new stuff in here, but a lot of, so I wanted to make sure I get the new stuff. Okie dokie. Okay, I think this is new. Yeah, 3. The course correction that this court should require lower courts to apply. This court's prior holdings in NEPA cases can be broken down into 2 independent limitations on a court's review authority. You know what? I'm just processing. I wonder if, like, never mind. That's not my place. Well, I don't think this should maybe my place to say, but what I thought, and then I was like, well, never mind. I shouldn't say this, but I was thinking maybe that's why they said just decide either way in the other document, because if the court goes in one way, maybe they'll be able to argue to benefit financially from the oil production on their land. But if it goes the other way, that's better for the environment. Maybe that's what happened there, or am I wrong for thinking that? But anyway, it says this court's prior holdings in NEPA cases can be broken down to 2 independent limitations on a court's review authority. 1. A court cannot vacate based upon an agency's alleged failure to consider environmental consequences that are not within that agency's jurisdiction or authority. And 2. A court generally cannot vacate if an agency has considered all of the reasonably foreseeable consequences that are within its authority. The first of these 2 independent requirements is a bright line rule. The second, reasonable foreseeability, is a very common legal standard, but is not a bright line standard. This court should clarify that when a court is conducting NEPA review, it should treat the first of these 2 independent limitations as a threshold issue. The court should reiterate that when an agency has no ability to prevent a certain effect due to its limited statutory authority, the agency need not consider that effect. Where the agency has considered the effects are within the agency's statutory authority, that is the end of the judicial inquiry, and the agency's decision withstands NEPA review. A reviewing court should not even consider a plaintiff's allegation that an agency failed to consider reasonably foreseeable effects unless and until it determines that those alleged foreseeable impacts are within the agency's authority or jurisdiction. Here, the D.C. Circuit plainly violated this court's precedents because it skipped over the threshold first issue. The conclusion that the D.C. Circuit erred is particularly obvious here because the agency was being asked whether to authorize a common carrier rail line. Shippers and the market, not the agency, determines which products a common carrier rail line carries. Conclusion. For all the above reasons, the court should vacate the decision of the court below and remand as requested by petitioners. Respectfully submitted. Alrighty. So, then let's just check out some tribal treaties here that I believe are also relevant regarding the Ute Indians versus the United States, Confederate bands of the Ute Indians. So, just in consideration of the background that the legal team gave on the Ute Indian Tribe there, in the syllabus of this other court case relating to their treaties, it says, by a treaty of 1868 between the United States and the Ute Indians, a reservation was established for the Indians in Colorado. Subsequently, an erroneous survey showed the northern boundary to be the south of the true boundary, and as excluding the White River Valley lands which actually were in the reservation. Believing the survey to be accurate, desiring to preserve these lands for the use of the Indians, the President, by an executive order of 1875, withdrew from sale and set apart for the use of the Ute Indians, as an addition to present reservation in said territory, a strip of land north of the present Ute Indian Reservation. Later, in order to punish the Indians for a massacre, dispossessed them of the reservation and removed them from Colorado, Congress passed the Act of June 15, 1880. which ratified and embodied an agreement by their leaders to cede the United States all territory of the present reservation, and provided that all land so ceded not allotted specifically to individual Indians would be restored to the public domain for sale as public lands, and that, subject to certain conditions, the proceeds of their sale should be distributed to the Indians. An executive order of 1882 declared that the land set apart for the use of the Ute Indians by executive order of 1875 is hereby restored to the public domain. The Indians brought this suit under the Act of June 28, 1938, 52 Statutes 1209 as amended, to obtain compensation for the lands north of the original reservation made available to them by the executive order of 1875. Yeah, it looks like, so basically they just got their fucking land stolen again. So, anyway, putting that into context as well in regards to land situation. So, linked in the description of this video, you can go check this out. So let's just do like a little recap here. I know we've been reflecting on a lot and talking about a lot here. And so the reason I also felt like it was important to mention like showing all sides here, you know. At the end of the day, I'm against the way that the Supreme Court is, in my opinion, abusing authority through having, you know, conflicts of interest where certain people are allowed to profit off of certain decisions happening here, right? And so I'm coming into this whole situation strong on the respondent side because I'm just theoretically already against the fucking petitioners. I will say though, as if I understand the case correctly, but I will say, based on tribal sovereignty, I do also hope that perhaps with the law there is a way for, you know, the tribe to get what they want out of this situation, while also putting into respect, you know, ways to address some of the other problematic issues that are happening here. And obviously I'm against like the whole industry of, you know, like fossil fuel industry and the climate, like how it's causing climate change. But I feel like, you know, based on the fact that fossil fuels are a resource, I do believe we should be putting all resources into indigenous control. I believe all the land needs to be in tribal sovereignty. Like, I don't understand how the United States government thinks they have any right to this land. It's like, what? Literally, it's just genocide. It's just theft. It's just shitty people who aren't true to their word. Ugh. Anyway, so doing deals with the government kind of means nothing too, because it's not like the government is based on anything ethical. The law is literally based on being unethical. So I fucking hate, like, I have a love-hate relationship with the law because it's like, on one hand, I like understanding what the procedures are, and I like having guidelines to follow for things, right? I like there to be like, we have an agreement, this is what the agreement is, and now we know what that is, and we have an understanding. So on one hand, I like the law for those types of reasons, but on another way, I don't like the law because it's like not built or based on a system actually meant to uphold justice or peace or like anything good about the world. The entire judicial system in quote unquote America is based on fucking perpetuating and maintaining genocide. It's not based on helping shit. So you know what I'm saying? But that's just me. All right, sorry. I said I was doing a recap and that was like a ramble, but to an actual recap. So today, we've been discussing in an ongoing conversation about Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch and Philip Anschutz, how Philip Anschutz is an oil tycoon, and you could potentially argue that he even possibly partly monopolizes the mainstream entertainment industry as well, particularly in the music industry with festivals like Coachella, Jazz Fest, and New Orleans all winter circle shows when you go there, you're giving your money to Philip Anschutz. But so like, you know, like we started into this journey looking into the finances behind the music industry, then looking into the unethical court cases between Phil and Neil, and now we check that out a little bit more today by looking into some of the social connections between Phil, Neil, this dip fuck named Leonard, who is like known for helping with the abortion ban getting passed and putting together like the right-wing government and having this money to fund a bunch of shit. And then we looked at the press briefing from Accountable US regarding NEPA and Gorsuch. And then we looked at some different overviews from legal commentary and coverage places regarding the court case on the 7-county infrastructure coalition versus Eagle County, Colorado, so we could see an overview of the documents and the case facts there. And then we looked at some of the actual case documents. So we looked at the petition filed by the petitioners. We looked at 2 briefs filed by the respondents. And then we looked at 2 more briefs filed by the Ute Indian Tribe in support of the petitioners. And so, yeah. And we talked a little bit more about the Ute Indian Tribe's just impact also being experiencing like just the genocide and things, and how this all comes back to their displacement also. I think that's something to really reflect on and marinate on, because that's some heavy shit right there. So yeah. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to try to remember to link everything I've been talking about in the description of this video. Check out the Supreme Court playlist that I did regarding Phil Anschutz of AEG and Neil Gorsuch. Check that shit out. Highly recommend it, because if you haven't yet, that will just explain way more of shit that I've been talking about if you don't already know. So yeah. Alrighty, thank you so much. I hope you have a good night. Don't forget to take care of yourself, floss your teeth, all that good shit. And yeah, bye. Thanks for watching. Join the loyalty program at noladeathchild.com/loyalty and check in during live streams to get points for rewards.